Imagine building a landing page so captivating that it stops users in their tracks, grabs them by the eyeballs, and demands their attention. A site where every interaction comes alive with pure magic. In this video, you won't just be building a landing page, you're going to be crafting a digital masterpiece that combines cutting-edge technology with breathtaking design. On this page, every section is animated, every element is responsive, and every interaction is silky smooth. This isn't just a regular landing page, this is an experience. Let's face it, building ordinary websites makes you invisible. Your work drowns in a sea of sameness, and the result is crickets from job applications, hiring managers who ghost you, and clients who won't give you a second glance. It's like screaming into a void. To break through, you need to create the extraordinary, something that captivates users, showcases your talent, and makes you stand out from the crowd. And that's exactly what you're about to create. Throughout this video, you'll learn to build jaw-dropping parallax animations at 60 frames per second. You'll create elegant infinite scrolling animations with fades that effortlessly flow on and off the screen. And you'll add micro interactions that breathe life into the page. But this isn't just about aesthetics. We'll be using the same cutting-edge tools that are dominating the front-end dev landscape. For starters, we'll build our page on a foundation of React, which is the same framework that Facebook, Netflix, and Airbnb use to build their interfaces. We'll also be using Next.js to make our page blazing fast and SEO friendly from the ground up. For styling, we've chosen TailwindCSS to create our styles at lightning speed. And to bring our show-stopping animations to life, we'll be using Framer Motion, which allows us to create complex animations with minimal code. But this video is more than just a cool project with amazing technologies. This could be your golden ticket to landing that dream job, attracting high-paying clients, or starting down a new career path. Imagine the doors this project could open for you. In short, your dreams aren't years away, they're one project away, and we're building that project right now. Now, before we do anything else, make sure you visit the link in the description to download all of the assets for this project, including the pixel-perfect Figma design and the starter template with all of the images and icons pre-exported and ready for you to use. Now, before we dive in, let's take a look at what we'll actually be building. We'll notice right away that there's an animated hero image, and as we scroll, you'll notice that the nav bar is blurred and that there are parallax effects in the hero to create the images that move with the scroll position as well. As we scroll down to the logo ticker, you'll notice that the logos smoothly come in, appear in the middle, and smoothly transition out of the page on the left-hand side. Down in the product image section, once again, we're using a great smooth parallax effect to create images that enhance our product image on this landing page. Down in pricing, we have a subtle micro interaction for the popular pricing card that shows a gradient that animates from left to right. And down in testimonials, we have an impressive infinite testimonial scroll effect with different columns that move at different rates of speed. That looks amazing on this page. And as we go to the bottom call to action section, you'll notice once again, we're using a parallax effect to create a page that looks truly incredible. To get started, all we'll need to do is drag the template that you've downloaded into your IDE, and that will bring it up. Then we'll need to open our terminal and ensure that we have everything installed by running a simple npm install. That should install all of our dependencies in just a few seconds and make sure that we are ready to dive into this project. In order to bring up our project in a browser so that we can see it, all we need to type is npm run dev, and that will start the Next.js server and give us a URL in order to show this. So we just need to command or control click on that URL, and that is going to bring up the project in our browser. Now, once we opened up our template folder, let's go ahead and dive into the folder structure so that we can understand what we're getting ourselves into and where everything is located. So inside of the source directory, we can see that we have 4 other directories. We have the app directory, which is holding our layout in our page.tsx that we're going to be working on as the main Next.js page. We also have our assets directory, which holds all of our images and icons that we're going to use during this project. Inside of components, we have a folder here. We don't have anything here yet, but if there are reusable components that we're going to use throughout the project, we can break these out and put them inside of our components folder. So that's what that is there for. And then inside of sections, we have all the sections that we're going to work on, starting with the header and going all the way through the footer. Now, all these sections right now just have an exported React component that returns null. So it's not going to show up until we have something to show. Let's go over to our package.json file, and we can see that we have a couple of dependencies as well as dev dependencies. So we're using React, we're using React DOM version 18. We're also using Next.js as the framework for this page. And then we have Framer Motion, which of course we're going to use to bring in all of those great animations and effects that are really going to make our page pop. We have some dev dependencies as well. So we're bringing in an SVGR dependency that's going to make it easier for us to use icons as components. We also have TypeScript definitions for Node, React, and React DOM. ESLint is going to warn us if there's anything wrong with our code as we type it. And PostCSS is used as a dependency for TailwindCSS, which we're going to be using throughout this project. Tailwind merge is a dependency that I haven't used on a video before, but we'll dive into what that is and how to use that and how that will really help us out as we're writing our Tailwind CSS. And then of course we have TypeScript, which just helps us make sure that we're writing good code that's actually going to execute and work the way that we want it to. Now that we know what's in our package.json, let's go ahead and head over to our app directory and take a look at our layout and our initial page template. So in the layout, we can see that this is essentially a default Next.js layout with a couple of things that I've changed. So the first thing I've changed is we're using the DM Sans font from Next Font Google. So that'll give us the correct font that we're using for our design. We also have imported TW merge, and that's going to help us to merge Tailwind CSS class names together in a really easy way. So there's packages like class names and CLSX that do essentially the same thing. TW merge just gives us an additional capability because it's not going to allow us to write conflicting Tailwind CSS classes. It's actually going to merge those together into something that will make a lot more sense. You can see that we have a little bit of metadata as we scroll down the page, and of course we have our root layout, which just basically defines our HTML, our body, and allows us to drop in our page right here where it says children. I have included the DMSens class name as well as the anti-aliased class, which is really important to make our rendered page look a lot closer to our design because of the way the fonts render. And we have a background color as well that's just going to help us to make the nav bar work a little better and a little more easily because we need it to blend into the hero section. Now you'll understand what we're talking about as I dive into the page itself. Under page.tsx, right now we just have this exporting an H1 with hello world, and that's just going to ensure that when we bring up the browser that we're seeing that this is actually being rendered onto the page. So this is really just a debugging device. We're going to drop all of our sections into this page.tsx file as we move along. Okay, I think that pretty much does it for directory structure. Let's go ahead and make sure that we actually see something show up on the screen when we run our dev command. So open up your terminal, and all I want you to do is go ahead and run npm run dev, and that should start up the Next.js server as it has here, and then we'll go ahead and open up our browser and see what this looks like. Now I've brought up my browser in a mobile view, but as you can see, it does say hello world, and it is using the DM Sans, the correct font, so that we know everything is hooked up correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and close that terminal, and then let's take a look at our design. Over in our design, we can see that we have a desktop, a tablet, and a mobile version. So this is great for responsive design. We have every single view that we need in order to create a responsive page. Now we're going to be primarily building the mobile version and then creating the responsive variants, but just so we understand what's in the design and how we're going to build it, let's look at the desktop version first. So in the desktop version, you can see that we have a couple of things at the top. We have a banner right here that says streamline your workflow, boost your productivity, get started for free. So that'll be part of our header. And then we have a nav bar as well. Looks like it has a logo with some navigation features on the right. As we scroll down, we have this amazing hero section that has a couple of images. We're going to be adding a great parallax effect to those, and we'll have this main hero cog here that we're going to add an animation to as well. Over on the left, we have our tag and title, description, and buttons. So we'll be creating all those as well. Scrolling down, we have the logo ticker. Now this logo ticker is going to look like, when it's all said and done, it's going to look like these are infinitely scrolling to the left. This is a great effect for these, and I can also see that it's covered with some sort of gradient that just makes them disappear on the edges. So that's going to be a really, really nice effect when that's all done. We also have a product image. We can see that the product is very cleanly displayed alongside a couple of other great images added to the left and right. So those are really going to show off that product screen very well. We have a pricing section. This pricing section is interesting because you usually don't see the prices stacked from short to tall, but of course we can do that easily with Flexbox. And then we're also going to add a great animation on this most popular tag here. You'll see how we do that once we dive in right there. As we scroll down, we can see we have our testimonial section. The testimonial section has 3 different columns of testimonials, and like you saw, we're going to make those flow from bottom to top with some more animation effects. And then we won't forget our call to action section. We've got a couple of images that are going to have a parallax effect to the left and the right. A couple of things that you might notice or might not notice about this design is that every single header also has a little bit of a gradient to it. So you can see this pathway to productivity goes from a black to like this dark blue. So we're going to be creating that for that. And then as you scroll to each of the other headers, you can see that those also have that same effect. So we're going to be creating that effect and applying it to all of our titles for all of our different sections. Of course, we're going to be starting with the mobile design. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like real quick. We pared that down a little bit because we don't have quite as much real estate. So we're going to be creating that a little bit differently. We're going to make sure that we have our hamburger menu icon in the top instead of the normal menu. And we're going to take away a few of the images as we scroll through our mobile view so that we can provide a great view for phones and other mobile devices. Nothing too crazy here. Most things are just stacked on top of each other. The one thing that is going to definitely change is our testimonials, where we're only going to show one of those columns instead of all 3. And then of course we get down to our footer where we have our logo, our social icons, and a copyright. Now, as I've done in other videos, we're going to break this down and we're going to build this one section at a time. We're going to make sure that that section is fully responsive before we move on. And then at the end, I'm going to go back and I'm going to apply all of the animations and effects that are really going to make this page stand out. So for starters, we're going to be creating our header, which is going to be both the banner and the navigation. Now, the reason that we're going to create these together in this particular case is because we're going to make both of these sticky, which means they're going to move along the page as the user scrolls. So we're going to create these within the same component and show them to the user together. Go ahead and come back to your template and open up your header.tsx section, and we're going to apply this to our page.tsx. So let's go ahead and call this, make sure this is called header, and then we're going to return just some header text to ensure that this shows up. And then on our page.tsx, we're going to import that component. So we're going to import our header from @/section/header, and then we're going to return this right here as a header component. And as we can see, it did show up in the browser, so that works well. Now that we know that works, let's go ahead and dive into our actual header code. All right, now that we are in our header, let's go ahead and start creating our banner. So we know our banner is going to have some text inside of it. So let's create a div, and that text is probably going to be inside a paragraph, and it's going to say get started for free. And we also know that that div is going to have a class name of, we're going to flex that and make sure that it's justified to the center. Our items are centered. We want it to have a little bit of padding, so PY3 for that padding. The background is going to be black, so BG black for that. And then the text is going to be white, so we have text white for that. Our text is going to be small as well, so let's add in our text small and ensure that we also have our icon next to our banner text as well. So I'm going to go ahead and import that. Now, since we have SVGO, we can import the icon as a component instead of just importing an SVG file. So let me show you how that works. I'm going to import my arrow right icon. I can find it inside of my asset. So I have this arrowright.svg file. I can import that with a capital letter, and that will make that a component if I just say arrow right from @/assets/arrowright.svg. And then I can just place this right next to my paragraph as a simple component. Now it's way too large right now. We're gonna need to bring that down with our class names, and we're gonna just say that the height is gonna be 16, so H4. The width is also gonna be 16, that's width 4. And then we also want that to be inline flexed. And we're gonna say justify center and items center. That should line everything up correctly. Now we want the gap between our text and our arrow to be there, so we can do that with this flex box. But since we're going to have some additional text that's going to be showing up later, let's go ahead and wrap this paragraph and the arrow in a different div. Let's go ahead and give that a class name of inline flex, and then let's get ahead and give it a gap of 1 and ensure that our items are aligned to the center, and wrap that div around both of our paragraph and our arrow right, and hit save. So that did add those 4 pixels of gap there, and it also made sure that everything was aligned correctly in our banner. Okay, now that we've completed our banner, at least in the mobile view, let's move on to our nav bar. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a div right here for our nav bar. And of course, we're going to have our logo on one side and our menu icon on the other. Now this is throwing an error right now because we have 2 divs that are siblings of each other without having a wrapper. So of course we know that we're going to wrap both of these because we want these to be sticky to the top. So I can wrap these in a header semantic tag, and then I can put the ending header at the bottom there, and that will allow that to work correctly. Now let's go ahead and import our logo image. Let me go ahead and import our logo from my assets @/assets/logo sas.png file. And then we'll just use that by bringing in next image as well, so that we can have optimized images from our Next.js features. So let me go ahead and import the image component as well from next/image, and then we'll use that image component here. So I'll say image, my source is going to be my logo, my alt text is going to be my SAS logo, my height and width are going to be 40 pixels each, and let's see how that shows up. Okay, so that looks great. We also know that we need a container in here, so let me just go ahead and add a div class name equals container. Around that, that'll give a little bit of space between the edge of the page and of course the interior of our component. And we know that we're also going to have some padding top and bottom here, so let me add a class name, and let's say that this is PY5 for padding to the Y direction of 20 pixels. And save that, and that does indeed add the padding that we need to the top and bottom. Now on the other side of our container, we know that we need our menu icon, so let's import that as well. We'll import our menu icon, and we're gonna get that from @/assets/menu.svg, and we can bring that in as a component as well just by adding menu icon right like that. Our menu icon is way too big as well, so let's go ahead and add a class name to that, and let's say that our height is going to be 20 pixels. Our width is also going to be 20 pixels, and that brings that down to size. Now we know that we want these justified differently with Flexbox, so let's go ahead and wrap those in a Flexbox container with div class name equals flex, and let's go ahead and give that ending div around the menu icon and the image, and then we're going to say that these need to be aligned to the center and justified space between with our justify between class. The last thing that we're going to want to do right now is go ahead and make this header sticky, but we're not going to be able to test this out yet because we don't have any way to scroll until our page is actually long enough to scroll. So I'm going to go ahead and add a sticky class here, and let's save that and make sure that nothing changes. And of course, we'll want to make sure that that happens immediately by setting top 0. Now that we've completed the mobile view of this, let's look at the other breakpoints. If we take our browser and we go to the tablet view, we know that this is where we're going to want to see our menu and our button appear in the header. So let me go ahead and stretch this out a little bit so we can get a little bit better view of this. And then we're going to want to put in that CSS and HTML that makes that work. So for my menu icon, I'm going to hide that when I get to this size. So I'm going to say medium hidden to make that not display anymore. And then I'm going to want a navigation to show up here. So I'm going to use my nav tag, and we're going to put a few different links here. It looks like those names are about. We're also going to have a link for features, customers, updates, and help. And we're also going to have a button that lives here. So I'm going to use the button tag, and we're going to say get for free. Now that navigation is going to be hidden in our mobile view. So I'm going to add the class name of hidden. And then when we get to the medium view, we're going to show it with flex so that it shows as flex in this view. And then we're going to ensure that we have the correct gap between all the items. That should be 24 pixels. We also want the text to, by default, be black with a 60% opacity. So I'm going to say text black /60 to do that. And we, of course, want our items to be aligned to the center. Now we just need to go ahead and style up our button. So I'm going to go ahead and add a class name to the button itself. And this is going to be BG black. We know that we're going to have text white here. We're also going to give it a little bit of padding left and right. So that's going to be PX4 for 16 pixels of padding left and right. PY2 will give it top and bottom padding of 8 pixels. We're going to make it rounded large to give it 8 pixels of border radius. We want the font to be a little bit heavier. So that's going to be font medium or 500. And then we also are going to just go ahead and make this inline flex. So inline flex, we're going to align everything to the center and justify it to the center. And that should take care of our button styles for now. Oh, one more thing. We also want to make our text a little bit tighter using the tracking rule. So I'm going to say tracking tight, and that will give it the negative 2.5% of letter spacing that will just make the text pixel perfect to the design. The other thing that I'm noticing as I look at my design versus what we have right now on the screen is that our banner isn't quite right because we have additional text when we get to this screen size. So let's come back up to our Flex container and add that in as well. So I'm going to add another paragraph, and that's going to say streamline your workflow and boost your productivity. Now that has a little bit of different styles. That has a little bit of lighter text. So let's add a class to that as well and say the text white /60 will give it 60% opacity so that that's correct. We also want this to be hidden on mobile, but we want this to show up on tablets. I'm going to say medium. We're going to show that as a block, display block. And then we also want to have a little bit of gap between this paragraph and our get started for free text. So we're going to need to add that to this flexed container here by saying gap 3 for our 12 pixels of gap between those two lines. Now it should stay the same between the tablet and the desktop view, but of course, let's go ahead and take a look and ensure that everything looks correct. So I've gone ahead and opened up my desktop view. Let me go ahead and open this up so we can really see what we're looking at here. And this is the desktop view. Everything looks right to me right now. So that means that this section is complete. It's pixel perfect to the design. I'm really happy with how this looks right now. Let's move on to the next section. Coming back to our design, the next thing that we're going to be taking a look at is the hero section. So we have desktop, tablet, and mobile once again. Let's go ahead and look at our mobile design, and then we'll look at how that's going to change in the tablet and desktop. So in the mobile view, we can see we have a couple of things here. We have some spacing here. We have a tag, title, a description, a couple of buttons. So we're going to be wanting to create some components to be able to reuse our button styles. And then we have this cog image here. This is going to be flexed top and bottom. As we get to our tablet view, that's really where the section is going to start to come alive. That's going to start to put our text on the left and our cog on the right. And it's also going to add this great cylinder image here that we're going to animate with parallax styles as we move forward. In the desktop view, this is probably one of my favorite parts of this page, but we see that it adds an additional noodle image here that we're going to put on our bottom right-hand side of the hero, and that's also going to be parallax animated. Now this section isn't going to be all that difficult, but of course we're going to need to pay close attention to the specifics of the design to ensure that we get a pixel perfect result when we're all done. Coming back into our code, let's go ahead and open up our sections/hero.tsx file and ensure that we can actually see this hero on the page. So I'm going to add a return value of a string of hero, and then in my app/page.tsx, I'm going to go ahead and import my hero component from @/sections/hero. And then inside of here, I'll ensure that we can see the hero by just adding the hero component here. Now it's going to yell at me because we once again are running into that sibling problem with React. So we're going to go ahead and add a simple React fragment around these, and that will ensure that we can add siblings next to each other. As you can see, as soon as I save that, we do see our hero text on our mobile screen. So that means we're ready to dive in to our code. Back in the hero component, let's go ahead and start creating our code. So we know that we're going to wrap this in a semantic section tag. Inside that section, we're going to go ahead and create a container to ensure that our content isn't touching the sides of the page. I'm going to give that a class of container. And then inside our container, we'll go ahead and create a left and right column. So I'm just going to wrap that for now in a simple div tag. And this is going to be the text that we're going to put inside of our hero. Now the first part of our text is going to be a tag. So I'm going to say div, and I'm going to go ahead and give this a class name. I'm not going to put anything there yet. And I'm just going to put the tag content of version 2.0 is here. Below that, we know that we'll have our title. So I'm going to wrap that in probably an H1 in this case, a semantic H1. And then inside that title, we're going to say pathway to productivity. And then we're going to have a description below that. I'm going to wrap that in a paragraph tag, and I'm going to copy and paste that text from the design. So that's going to say, celebrate the joy of an accomplishment with an app designed to track your progress, motivate your efforts, and celebrate your successes. Below that, we're going to have two buttons. We know they're going to be flexed left and right. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap those in a div and then go ahead and add the button tags. So that we're going to have one button that says get for free. And then we're going to have another button that's going to say learn more. As soon as I save that, we do see that show up. So we have all of the text that we need. Let's go ahead and dive into the styles for this text. For our tag, we want the text to be 14 pixels. So we're going to say text small. That's also going to be inline flexed. And we're going to make sure that there's a border. That border color is going to be a 222 color. So #222. And then we're also going to say that that is a 10% opacity, so that's /10. We're going to add 12 pixels of padding to the left and right with px3. And we're going to add 4 pixels to the top and bottom with py1. We also want that to be rounded, and that's going to be rounded large to give that 8 pixels of border radius. A lot of the text elements in this design also have a little bit of a letter spacing adjustment, and this tag is no different. So we're going to give this a tracking tight, and that's going to give that a 2.5% letter spacing decrease to just bring the text in a little bit. Now it's time to style our title. So that's going to be our pathway to productivity. Let's go ahead and give this a class name as well. This title is going to be 48 pixels tall. It's also going to be font bold. We're going to set the tracking or the letter spacing to tighter to give it a -5% letter spacing. And here is where we're going to do our gradient effect over the text. So what we're going to want to do is set the background of the text to the gradient. We're going to make the text transparent and tell the browser to clip the gradient to the text. So how we're going to do that is we're going to say bg gradient to bottom to B, and then we're going to say from black, and that's going to go to a 001 E80 color. Then we're going to make the text transparent, and we're going to say that the background clip is going to be around the text itself. And that creates the amazing gradient that you see here. We also want to ensure that we have the right amount of margin on this. So I'm going to add a margin top of 24 pixels, and that will push that down from the tag appropriately. Coming over to our description, let's go ahead and add a class name to this. We want the font size to be 20, so that's going to be text XL. We're also going to set a custom text color, so that's going to be text, and then we're going to give it a 010 D3E color, and that's going to give it that dark blue. And we want our tracking or our letter spacing to be a little bit tighter, and we're going to say tracking tight, and that's going to ensure that we have the correct amount of letter spacing. To give it the spacing between the title and the description, let's go ahead and add MT6, and that should be the 24 pixels of spacing that we see in the design. Moving down to our buttons, we can go ahead and give this a class name of flex just to be able to make sure that we can control the container. We want to ensure that there is 4 pixels of spacing between them with gap-1, that they're aligned to the center with item center, and that we have 30 pixels of space between the buttons and the text. And since we don't have an exact value for that in Tailwind, I'm just going to say MT 30 pixels, and that should give us 30 pixels of margin. For the buttons themselves, we know that we've already used a black button before, so this is probably a good time to start creating some utility classes to allow us to quickly add styles to things that are styled exactly the same way. So we know that up in our header, we have some button styles, and we can see that we have a bunch of these right here. This button is styled exactly the same way. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to edit our global CSS with these styles so we can create some utility classes. Now, the way that we want to do this in Tailwind CSS is not to simply just create a class name here like BTN and then put some styles right here. The reason this doesn't make sense with Tailwind is because when we do this, what ends up happening is even if we don't use this class, it's always going to add the CSS to our output CSS. We don't want anything we don't want to use, but we do want to use this. However, we also want to be able to override these classes as well. So the best way to do this is to add it to one of these layers that Tailwind CSS gives you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say in our components layer or at layer components, I'm going to add in our button class, and that button class is going to have all the styles that we need. Now we know that our button background is going to change, the text color is going to change depending on what type of button it is. So we're also going to go ahead and have some utility classes for that as well. We're going to say if it's a primary button or BTN primary, that's when we're going to give it the background black and the text of white. So I'm going to pull this down here and go ahead and give that apply rule as well. Now that we've done that, we also know that we're going to, in this particular section, have a text button, and that one is going to have text black and a background of transparent. So let's go ahead and add another utility for that. Let's say background text, and we're going to add apply text black and BG transparent. After we've added in those utilities, let's come back to our hero and see if those work. So on these buttons, we're going to give it a class name of BTN for button. And it looks like we made a mistake with one of our classes. Let's go back and check this for a second. Okay, so align items, that isn't a real class. That should be items center. So if I save that again, we should see this come back up correctly. Let me go back to my hero and let's say button primary to see if that works. Okay, so that's creating a great primary button. And of course we want this to be a button as well. So let's give that a class name of button. That utility is going to encapsulate all of our tracking, all of our font styles, and of course we want this to be button text so that it has the correct background and color. The other thing that's inside this button that we haven't accounted for yet is an arrow. So I'm going to wrap a span tag around my text just so I can separate it from the arrow that we'll bring in. And then at the top of the file, I'm going to come up here and import my arrow icon, and that's going to be from @assets/arrow_right.svg, and then I'm going to use that inside my button. So let me go ahead and add my arrow right component there, or excuse me, arrow icon was what that was called. So let me go ahead and correct that to arrow icon. As is the case when we bring these icons in, we need to size them appropriately. So let me go ahead and add a class name here of H5 and width 5. That should make it the 20 by 20 pixels that we need. We also want to add a little bit of spacing in between the arrow and the text. And that looks like it's going to be just a gap of 1 to give it the 4 pixels of spacing that we need. Now those utility classes worked out perfectly. We're going to use that concept as we continue through this design to ensure that we're encapsulating some reusable utilities with Tailwind CSS so that we can add that and not have to rewrite the same styles over and over. So that was a definite win for this design. Moving down the hero, we know that we need our cog image in here. So I'm going to go ahead and import our cog image, and that's going to come from @/assets/cog.png, and we're going to use that with next image as well. So I'm going to go ahead and import next. I'm going to import image from next/image, and I'm going to drop that into the correct spot. This is the div that wraps our content. We're going to go ahead and create another div below that, and that div is going to wrap our image. Let's go ahead and throw our image in there, our image component. Our source is going to be our cog icon or our cog image. Our alt attribute is going to be cog image. And let's see how that shows up. So that shows up perfectly. That's exactly what we wanted to happen. In order to give the spacing between the image and the text, let's go ahead and give this div a class name, and let's just say MT20. That'll give that 80 pixels of spacing between our text and our cog image. Now there's a couple of things that are missing right now in our hero in our mobile view. One of the things is that there's a gradient that goes from the bottom left of the hero section all the way up to the top. So we need to add that in. The second thing is we're also missing any kind of spacing between the hero and the other content on the page. So we're going to go ahead and add that in as well. For the spacing, we can take care of that very easily. Let's go ahead and add a class name to our section, and let's give it 32 pixels of spacing on the top. We're also going to give it the required 80 pixels of spacing on the bottom, and that will separate our tag from our navigation like we see there. And it also gives it a little bit of space down here to make it much more accurate to the design. Now, in order to create the radial gradient that we see in the design, we need to go ahead and use a custom Tailwind background image of radial-gradient. In that radial gradient, we're going to make it an ellipse because it's not going to be a straight circle. It's going to be 200% of the width and 100% of the height. And we're going to leave that at bottom left, which means it's going to start from the bottom left. It's going to go from a hex code of 183 EC2, and it's going to go to a hex code of EAEEFE, which you should recognize as our background color, and that's going to be at 66%. And as soon as I hit save, you can see that that gradient does appear. So that's looking really good. Now that we can scroll, we're seeing what we're missing on our nav bar in our header component. One of the things that we're missing is we don't have any kind of blur effect here, and that's actually really easy to add in with Tailwind CSS. So now that we've done this, let's go back to our nav bar and see if we can go ahead and add that in. So I'm going to go back to my header.tsx component, and of course we don't have any background yet, which is fine. We can just say backdrop blur small, and that'll give it the 4 pixels of blur. Let's see if that's working. And indeed, that's working perfectly. That looks really nice, gives it just that nice effect of blurring the content as it scrolls under the sticky header, which is exactly the effect that we wanted. Now that we took care of that, let's go back to our hero.tsx and see what we can do here. Let's go and look at what our responsive design looks like right now, and then we'll ensure that we can create that according to our design. Moving over to our tablet, this right now is looking much different than the design, and most of that is because we don't have our cog to the right, so we need to ensure that we have these flexed appropriately. So right now we have all of our content inside of this div, and then we have our image inside of this div. We need to wrap those in a flex container. So let me go ahead and create another div around both of those. I'm just going to copy and paste that ending div tag right there, hit save, and that should put it inside of the same container. And then we're going to give that a class name of flex. It's going to ensure that those go left to right. Now, of course, we don't want this to happen until the right time, so we only want this to take effect when we switch to the medium screen size. Then those will be flexed. Let's ensure that we didn't mess up our mobile as we scroll back down. And indeed we didn't, because we did it the right way. When I go over to the tablet view, there are a couple of things that we want to take care of. The first one is we want this image to actually not really be constrained by the amount of space that we have. It actually needs to go off to the left of the page. So there's a couple of things that we're going to have to set in order to make that happen. The first is we want to give this a defined width. Our content div, we want to give that a defined width at this screen size. Let's go ahead and add a class name here. And let's say medium, the width is going to be 478 pixels. That's going to make sure that we have the right width on that. The other thing that we're going to want to do is at this size, we want a defined height on our div right here. And we also aren't going to want this to take effect anymore. So let's go ahead and give a medium of MT0 so that we don't have that happening. We also want to give it a defined height. So medium, it's going to have a height of 648 pixels. That will ensure that we have the correct amount of space for our cog. And we're also going to tell this to go ahead and grow and take up more space as necessary with medium flex 1. Now that we've done that, we can also make sure that our flex container is aligned to the center with items center, and that will ensure that we are indeed aligning that content to the center. Now it looks like everything's out of whack right now, but it's actually exactly as we need it in order to get our image to grow to the right size. At this size, we need this image to be positioned absolutely. So let's see how we can make that work. Let's go ahead and give this a class name of medium absolute to ensure that that's positioned absolutely. We also want to make sure that it's inside the right container. So I'm just going to make sure that this is positioned relative as well. And this is going to grow. So we're going to say that the height is going to be the full size of that container. Of course, that's only going to happen at the medium size. The width is going to be auto. And in order to get rid of some default Tailwind reset styles, we also need to say that the max width is not going to be, we're not going to pay attention to the size of the container for that. At this size of screen, we're also going to bring the cog icon over a little bit to the left. So that's going to look like medium, negative, left, 6. That'll give that 24 pixels of spacing towards the left of the screen. At this screen size, there's just a couple more things that we're going to need to take care of. One of them is going to be the size of the padding. So we have 8 and 5 right now representing 32 pixels and 80 pixels. At this screen size, we want the padding top to be only 20 pixels and we want the padding bottom to be the 40 pixels of padding there to make that equal to what's in the design. We can also see that one of the things that does change is our title size. And that's going to go from text 5XL to text 7XL to ensure that that is the right size. And of course, we only want that to take effect at this medium screen size. Now, if it still looks like there's something missing, that's because of this screen size, of course there is, and that is going to be our cylinder image that should be showing up absolutely positioned next to our cog. So we'll want to go ahead and import that as well. So we're going to import our cylinder image, and that's going to come from @/assets/cylinder.png, and we're going to use next image to show that as well. This is going to be inside of the same container. It's going to be over our cog image. If those ever overlap due to our parallax effect, we're going to use next/image to show that as well. So our source is going to be our cylinder image. Our width and height are going to be 220 in this case. And our alt tag is going to be cylinder image. Now that shows up as well, but of course it's not showing up in the right position, so we need to go ahead and add a class on this as well to ensure that it does show up in the right position. This class name is going to say that, of course, on the mobile size, it's going to be hidden, so we need to add that first, and then when we move up to the medium tablet size, that's when we're going to switch to block. To get this in the right position, we're going to say that it's going to move towards the top, and that's going to be 32 pixels towards the top. It's going to move towards the left. That's going to be 128 pixels there. And of course, we're going to need to also position this absolute. And that puts our cylinder in the right spot. The radial gradient seems to also be a little bit of a problem because we're stopping this color a little bit too early, or getting to this color a little bit too early. Let's try that at 100 and see what happens. And that looks much closer to the design while still keeping everything intact. The other thing I'm noticing is that we do have a little bit of overflow on our screen right now. We don't want that to happen. So we also added an overflow X clip, and that should ensure that we're clipping the content on the left and right of the screen. And that works well, but as I scroll, what I'm seeing is my cylinder is actually overflowing on top of my sticky navigation. So we're going to make sure that if we go back to our header, that this at least has a little bit of Z index to ensure that it shows above everything else. So let's go ahead and give this a Z index of, let's just say 20, and that should allow it to overflow everything else on the page. And that works beautifully. Now going back to our hero, there's only a couple of things that we need to update in order for this to look good on desktop. So let's first take a look at our desktop view and see how it's looking. The first thing I'm noticing is that we don't yet see the noodle image that's in the bottom right that I'm seeing in my design. So let's go ahead and import that one under the cylinder image. I'm going to import noodle image from @/assets/noodle.png. That'll give us the image that we can use, and then we're going to put it down here in the bottom using next/image. We're going to give that a source of our noodle image. We're going to give it a width of 220, and of course we're going to want to add a class to this one as well. So let's go ahead and save this and see where it shows up. Now we do want it to be absolute as well, so we're going to give this a class of absolute. And it's going to be 524 pixels from the top. So I'm going to say top 524 as a unique value for TailwindCSS. And from the left, it's going to be 448 pixels as well. Now this, we do want to only show up once we get to our desktop value. So we're also going to say hidden, and then we're going to say that when it gets to the desktop view or the large view, then we're going to go ahead and show it as block. Next.js also doesn't like that I don't have an alt tag here, so I'm going to give it an alt tag, and I'm going to say noodle image right here as well. It also needs to be rotated by a little bit. In the design, it's rotated by 30 pixels. So let's go ahead and give it a rotate of 30. And that does if we use the degree add-on there. So we rotated at 30 degrees. That looks great. The only other thing that I'm seeing is that on the desktop view, our cog is a little bit close to the text. It was moved over on the tablet in order to make it more visible on the screen. But on the desktop view, we don't need that anymore. So we're going to say large left 0, and that should take care of moving that to the correct spot. And that's it for the desktop view. Let's take a quick view at our entire page to make sure everything looks correct. We're actually going to switch to the horizontal view and see them all at once, just so that we can make sure that we haven't broken any of our designs as we've been creating our code. So the mobile looks great. We see that sticky header. It's working perfectly. It's overlaying our hero. And then let's see, this is the tablet view. We're seeing that. That looks awesome as well. And then coming over to the desktop view, we can see that that looks great as well. This is overflowing a little bit, but that's fine, of course, because we're going to put a section under here, and that's going to take care of that little bit of extra space that we're seeing there. But other than that, this is looking perfect. It's looking exactly like we want, which means it's time to move on to the next section. Back in our design, we've taken care of the banner, the nav bar, and the hero section. Let's take a look at the next section, and that's going to be this logo ticker. That's a small section on mobile, but it's definitely going to be eye-catching once we get the logo infinite scroll working. So on mobile, it looks like there is just a couple of logos shown. As we get to the tablet view, we see a few more logos. And of course, on desktop, we can see the full entire list of logos. These are going to be scrolling from right to left. And of course, we can see that it also has some sort of linear gradient over top as well to hide them as they come from the sides of the screen. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into our code and start coding this section up. Now that we're back in our code, let's go into our logo ticker section that should already be created. Of course, we're returning null. Let's go ahead and return the words logo ticker here and save that. And then we're going to go into our app/page.tsx, and we're going to import that section into our app. So let's import logo ticker from @/sections/logo ticker. And then we're going to come in here and go ahead and create our logo ticker down at the bottom of our list of components that we've brought into the home page. Once we save and scroll down, we should be able to see the words logo ticker, which we do, which means that our logo ticker is connected correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and close the page.tsx, and we'll spend the rest of our time here for this section. Now, we don't need these logo ticker words, so let's go ahead and create a wrapping div around here. The primary content of this section is, of course, going to be our images. So let's go ahead and import those at the top of the file. So I've got my first one is Acme logo. So I'm going to have my Acme logo from @/assets/acme logo-acme.png. I'm also going to import the quantum logo from @/assets/logo quantum. I have the echo logo, and that's going to come from the assets/logo-echo. I'm importing my celestial logo, and that's going to come from logo-celestial. And then I have my pulse from @/assets/logo pulse. And my last one is my apex logo, and that's going to come from @/assets/logo-apex.png. Okay, so those are the logos. We're going to put those all inside of a container. So let me go ahead and create that div with a class name of, container. After we've created that, we're going to put all of our logos inside a flexed container. So that's going to be another div that we're going to flex here in a second. And then of course, I'm going to bring in next/image as well. I can just start using next image. It should import it for me. So if I hit enter on image and I go down to my next/image, it should do that automatic import for me, which it does there. For each of these images, I have an image tag here. So I'm going to say source equals, and then I'm just going to fill in with my images themselves. I'm going to have an alt tag for each of these. And I want to go ahead and just use a bit of IDE magic to create these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my import statements. I'm going to copy and paste these, and I'm going to paste them into here. And then I'm going to see if I can create an alt tag that allows me to not have to do a bunch of typing. Almost there. Let's see, I can probably use a helper to tell it to transform to uppercase, which I can. Okay, so I just did that, and that allowed me to get through that a little bit quicker, and then each of those logos should be showing. So let's save that and see what we're seeing here. The other thing that I'm noticing is that each one of these should be the same size, and that they should have the same class names. Since we have a utility, essentially a utility function being used here, a utility class, let's go ahead and see if we can create that same thing inside of our globals.css. So I'm going to say logo ticker image, and we're going to give those the same class names, and then we can just apply the styles all at the same time. So each of these, I'm going to have, go ahead and select all these. I'm going to say that the class name for all these is going to be logo ticker image, and that will allow me to use this utility class that I'm defining in globals.css. So back in globals.css, I can say H8 for 32 pixels. Let's go ahead and apply that and see, okay. We also want the width to be auto, so let me say W auto. That works well. And I think that's pretty much all we have to add as far as classes, but that allowed us to do that without typing that out for each individual image itself. The other thing we want to do is, of course, make sure that these are flexed. So let's go ahead and class name, and let's say flex. The gap between them is going to be 56 pixels. So let's go ahead and add that gap in there. And then we also want to say flex none. That should ensure that it's actually going to respect what the actual logo height and width are when this is all put together correctly. And then I'm going to wrap this in another div, and this is essentially going to be the div that I'm going to use to hide left and right and to put that mask over. So this one is also going to be flexed. Let's see, class name equals flex. It's going to be overflow hidden. And then I'm going to put a mask image over this. Now this is going to say mask image, and then we're going to have a linear gradient, say to right, transparent, black, transparent. Let's scroll down a little bit and see if we can see that. And yes, we are. So essentially what we're doing here is when the mask image is transparent, it's actually going to show through the background color. When it gets to black, that means it's actually going to show the color that's inside the div itself. And then when it goes back to transparent, it's showing the background once again. So we're essentially just showing through the background until it gets to the center, which we're not showing any, then we're showing the image itself and going back to transparent. So this is a great trick for this. I've used absolutely positioned divs in the past, but the great thing about mask image is that absolutely positioned divs can of course take mouse clicks as well. So you can copy and paste through an image mask, but you can't always copy and paste through an absolutely positioned overlay on top of the logos themselves. So this is a great strategy to be able to use if you're doing something that needs this kind of treatment. The only other thing this section needs is to go ahead and add the padding top and bottom to ensure that we have some space in between this section and the last, and of course the next one. So I'm going to say class name, and that padding top and bottom is going to be PY8 for 32 pixels. And we also have a BG of white on this particular section. Now it looks like my logos just disappeared, but of course I just had to scroll down a little bit and then I can see my logos. There's a very slight difference between the actual background that is on the body by default and white, but there is definitely a difference there. So we want to call out that that is indeed white, not the background that we're using for our nav bar. Now this is looking good so far, but let's see how it's looking in our different responsive views. When we pull it out to tablet, we can see that it's showing up well, but we don't have quite enough padding on the top and bottom in the tablet view. So we need to go ahead and add a medium responsive modifier here, and then we need to say PY12, and that will add the responsive values that we need there. I'm not seeing anything else from this section on the tablet view, so let's go on and move to desktop and make sure that everything is still looking good there. I'm going to slide this over so we can get a bigger view of the desktop. And there we're once again seeing our noodle image. Now it's overlaying this section, which works perfectly. Now it doesn't look like there's any changes needed from this view either. Once again, we're going to go to view all of our horizontal screen sizes so that we can ensure that everything looks good left to right. And when I scroll down on my mobile in this browser, I can see that this looks good here. As I scroll over to tablet, it looks good there. And of course, over on desktop, it looks good there as well. So this section looks great. The responsive views are done. Let's move on to the next section. Back in our design, we're on to the next section, which is the product showcase. Now this is where we're showing a featured shot of the product image. It's not a ton to look at on mobile, but of course, as you move up to tablet and desktop, you start getting these decorative images on the left and right. And of course, the parallax effect, when we stick that in there, is just going to be impressive. Now, what I'm noticing about this particular part of the design is that we do have that same title effect that I talked about, where we have the gradient over the text going from black to that dark blue. It looks like we have some text here as well, another tag, and of course the image itself. So it doesn't look like there's anything too crazy here. We of course will want to make our responsive views appropriate so that the title text changes size when it comes from mobile to tablet. It looks like it stays the same size between tablet and desktop, and there's not too many other changes that we're going to have to make, but of course we're going to want to bring in these images and make them show up at the right time and of course in the right position. Now that we've seen what our design looks like, let's go into our sections and open up the product showcase.tsx file. Once again, we're going to want to return product showcase, and this will allow us to see if this component is hooked up correctly. We're going to come into app/page.tsx and import that section. So import product showcase from @/sections/product showcase, and we're going to drop this into the bottom of our home component. So this is going to be product showcase, and as soon as we hit save, we should be able to scroll down and see product showcase show up, which of course we are, which means that everything is hooked up correctly. Let me close out my page.tsx and we'll get to work on the product showcase. First thing that I like to do is add the semantic section tag that's going to wrap our entire section. And of course, we're going to use a container to wrap our content. So let me put that container in there. And then here's where we're going to start introducing the content. So the first part of the content is going to be the tag, and that's going to say boost your productivity. We're also going to have an H2, the semantic H2 tag for the title of this particular section. That's going to say a more effective way to track progress. And then as we move down, we're going to have a paragraph tag, and a copy and paste this from the design, but it's going to say effortlessly turn your ideas into a functional, responsive SaaS websites in just minutes with this template. Let's ensure that everything is showing up as far as content goes. The last part as far as content goes in this particular section is of course the image. So let's go ahead and import that. We're going to import the product image from @/assets/product-image.png, and then we'll use next image once again just by starting to use it and selecting the right import. We're going to give it a source of product image. A width and height will be fine. That's not a problem. Our alt is going to be product image. That works well. And then we're probably going to have a class name on this. I'm not entirely sure right offhand because we might not have to make any changes to it. And let's save that and ensure that all of our content is showing up like it should, which of course it is. Now let's dive into actually creating the mobile styles for this section. The first part of it is going to be adding our background gradient and of course our padding. So let's give this section a class name and let's give it a background gradient, BG gradient to bottom. And it's going to go from our white or hashtag FFF. We can do 6 values, that's fine. And that's going to go to a custom value of D2D-CFF. That will create the gradient background behind that and make it blend with the section above it. We'll also want to give it the 96 pixels of padding on the top and bottom. So we can do PY24 and that will give us the padding that we need for this particular section. Now I'm noticing that the styles that we can apply for this tag are very similar. In fact, they're exactly the same as the styles for the tag here at the top. And that means that we can once again apply another utility class to bring over the same styles and use them again and again. So I'm going to go into our hero.tsx and I'm going to find where we defined the tag styles. It looks like it's right here. And we're going to copy and paste these same styles and we're going to bring them into our globals.css file as a utility. So I'm going to call this utility tag and we're going to just apply these same styles to this. So let's see, it's going to make the text small. It's going to make this an inline flex. It's going to give it a border with a color of 222 and 10% opacity. It's going to give it some padding left and right and top and bottom, give it some border radius and pull in the letters a little bit with some letter spacing rules. So all that will apply to this tag as well. So if I save this, let me go ahead and apply this first to my hero. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all of this and add in the tag class. And let's double check that that shows up correctly, which it does. Now that I've done that, let me X out my hero, come back to my product showcase and give it a class name of tag. That way we don't have to continue to use the same Tailwind utilities and hope everything looks consistent. We can just give it that consistent utility with the components layer that Tailwind allows us to use. From there, we can see that this tag actually needs to be centered on the page. So let me go ahead and wrap this in another div. And that div, I'll go ahead and add a class name of flex to. That will allow me to justify center, and that will center my tag on the page. My title and description are also centered, so I can go ahead and add a class name of text center to these, and that will center those up. And now let's focus on the actual title styles. So this needs a class name of text3xl for the 30 pixel tall font size. We also want this to be a bold font using font bold. We want the tracking to be tighter, which is going to give it that -5% letter spacing. And then we're going to want to add in that background gradient. So we're going to do this the same way that we did our title up in the hero. So we're going to say BG gradient to bottom. We're going to say from black. That's going to go to this custom 001 E80 color. And then we're going to clip it to the text by saying text transparent and BG clip text. And that should give it a background clip of text and hold it into the text. It's not the easiest thing in the world to see, but if we do zoom in a little bit, hopefully we can see this a little bit more effectively. Let me bring this in a little bit and see if I can bring this to a higher zoom level. But it's not the easiest thing in the world to see. Let me go ahead and see if I can create something like 200% zoom and see if we can actually see this more effectively. Okay, so it's a lot easier to see there that this is indeed giving this the right linear gradient that we want it to. I'm going to bring this back down to 100% and bring this back over so we can get back into the code. The only other inconsistency I'm seeing with this title is that we need a little bit of margin in between our title and our tag. So let me go ahead and give this an MT5. That should give it the 20 pixels margin top that it needs to give it that little bit of separation. So that's looking good. Let's move on to our description. For our description, we know the text already needs to be centered. This one is a little bit different. It has the text size of 22 pixels, which is a custom Tailwind CSS value. We want a line height of 30 pixels using leading. So leading 30 pixels. We also want the tracking to be tight, which is going to give it that letter spacing of negative 2.5%. And we have a custom text color of 010D3E, and that should give it that dark blue color. It's very hard to see, but it is definitely different than black. We also want to give it MT5, and that should separate it from the title as well. Now that we've taken care of that, let's move on to our image. And it looks like the only thing that we really need to do with the image is separate it from the description. So we just need to give it a little bit of margin top. So I'm going to say MT10 to give it that 40 pixels of margin top. And that looks like it's working as well as it can. I think that wraps up the mobile view of this section. It's looking really good. Let's get started on the tablet and desktop view and at least take a look and see if there's any changes that we need to make. So as we go over to the tablet, one of the things I can see is we definitely need some sort of container around my content to ensure that it doesn't get too wide. And of course, I already pointed out in the design that the text size needs to increase in order for it to be the right size. So let's do those couple of things. The first thing I'm going to do is add that container around our content, and that's just going to be all around here. We're going to have a div. The class name is going to be empty for now, just so we can get our everything in the right spot. Let me just go ahead and save that, and that should show that it's around our tag, our H2, and our paragraph. This content container is just going to have a max width of 540 pixels. And of course, when we do that, we want it to be centered. So we just need to say MX auto. That should add margin left and right of auto and ensure that our content is centered on the page. The other thing that we want to be here when it switches to the tablet view is, of course, we want our decorative images to be on the left and right. So what we're going to want to do is make those relative versus the image that we already have, our product image. In order to do that, let's wrap our product image in a div, give it a class name of relative, and that should allow us to absolutely position the other images that we're going to bring onto the screen. One of the images is going to be the pyramid image. So I'm going to import my pyramid image from @assets/pyramid.png. And then I'm going to bring that in with next image as well. It's going to be over top of the product image, which means it's going to come later in the DOM. And I'm going to use next/image to show it as well. So I'm going to have my pyramid image here. My alt is going to be pyramid image, and my class name, we know it's going to be absolute, but I'm not sure exactly right offhand where it is going to go. So I'll have to reference the design for that, but let's just see where it shows up for now. And it looks like, based on the design, that it is going to be from the right. We're going to add a value of negative 144 pixels. And from the top, we're going to have a value of negative 128 pixels. We also want to make sure that it's the right size. So I'm going to add a height on this of 262. And same thing for the width, although it should be auto, we can add that as well. That should be 262 as well. The other image that we need to be here is the tube image. So let's go ahead and add that as well. We'll import the tube image from @assets/tube.png, and we'll bring that in here as well over top of our product image. So I'm going to use, once again, next/image. We're going to give it a source of our tube image. Our alt is going to be tube image. The height is going to be 248 pixels. Of course, we're going to want this to be absolutely positioned, so we need to give it a class name of absolute. And then we're also going to position it in the right position. So it looks like that's going to be bottom 24 to give it 96 pixels from the bottom. And then we're going to put some negative left positioning on it using negative left 36 to give it negative 144 pixels from the left. As I take another look at our tablet view, we can see that we haven't yet changed the title to be the right size either. So let's go back and ensure that we do change that title to be the right size here. So when it switches to the medium size, we want the title to be text 54 pixels. And then we also want the line height, or the leading, to be our 60 pixels. So that will look much better on the tablet view. One of the things this browser is telling me is that I have some overflow on the left and right. So if I scroll to the right, I can see that I actually have my image. It's taking up some space there and creating this gap on the right. We never want that to happen, so we need a way to clip that, and that's going to be at our section level. We can say overflow X clip, and that will ensure that anything that overflows to the X direction will be clipped and that I don't have that overflow problem anymore. Now that we've taken care of that, let's look at our desktop view and see if there's anything else that we need to address in this section. And I'm not seeing anything right offhand that we need to address. Everything looks right. Let me just pull it out a little bit more so that we can see the full design. And I'm going to go through mobile, tablet, and desktop using my horizontal view to ensure that nothing is broken in any of our views. So what I can see as I look at this section is in mobile, we forgot to hide this tube and this pyramid image. So on the tablet and desktop view, it looks great, but of course on mobile, we have one more thing, which is to make sure that those images are hidden on that side. So I'm going to put this back all the way over. I'm going to go ahead and focus on my mobile view. Let me pull this out and put it back into focus mode. And then I'm going to make sure that that's focused on the mobile view so I can make sure that this looks correct. I'm going to scroll down and I'm actually going to come in here and say hidden on these two images. So hidden will make them hidden, and then when they get to the medium size or the tablet size, then we're going to say block, and that will pull them in. And of course, same thing here, hidden and then medium block, and that will ensure that they show up at the right screen size. So as I go back to my tablet view, we can see that they show up, but when I go back to mobile, they're not there anymore. And that's exactly what we wanted. Okay, this section's responsive styles are done. It's time to move on to our next section. Now that we finished with the product showcase, that means we can move on to the pricing section. And as I look at the pricing section, what I'm seeing is we do have a title and a description with the same styles that we used before. So that'll be a great chance to use our utility classes. I'm also seeing a couple of pricing cards, and these are going to have some different styles. We're going to have a regular pricing card. It looks like we're going to have an inverse pricing card, and we're going to need to ensure to account for this popular tag that only exists on the inverse card. So we'll make sure that we'll account for that correctly with our component that we'll create for these pricing cards. As we move on to the tablet and the mobile view, we can see that we stack those cards on top of each other because there's not enough room to show them left and right. So that'll be pretty easy to do with Flexbox. And of course, at the smallest size, we're going to have the smallest size title as well. So we'll need to make sure and account for that. There's not too much else to see with this part of the design. So let's go ahead and hop into the code. Back in the code, we're going to come into our pricing section by opening up our pricing.tsx file. This does have our pricing tiers data already created for us so that we don't have to go through and create all that pricing data. That'll come with the template when you download that. That'll be in the link will be in the description for that. When we come down to the pricing section, we're just going to go ahead and return the word pricing here. And of course, in our app/page.tsx, we're going to import that pricing section. And once we do that, we can drop it into our list of sections. So we have our pricing section, and let's ensure that as we scroll down, we do see the word pricing, which of course we do, which means that we're good to go back to pricing.tsx and dive right in. The first thing we're going to do is create our semantic section tag. So that'll be section, then we're going to have div class name equals container for our container around our pricing. And then of course we're going to have our pricing cards, but before we do that, we'll need to put our title and description for this section. So it's going to be an H2 for the title. We're going to have a paragraph for the description. And for our title and description, let's go ahead and add the content for those that says pricing here. And then the description, I'm going to copy that from the design. It says free forever, upgrade for unlimited tasks, better security, and exclusive features. And we can scroll down and we can see that that is indeed there. Now the styles for these two are the same as the section above, which means that we can once again use Tailwind's utility components to ensure that we don't need to write this CSS more than once. So I'm going to go back up to my product showcase, and I'm going to take these styles, and then we can easily transport them over and create a component out of them. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm not going to add the margin itself because I don't like to change spacing with these. I just like to do the things that actually affect the interior of the component. So I'm going to go ahead and cut those out of there, bring it over into my globals.css, and I'm going to call this a section title. And that's going to have my copied and pasted styles here. So that's going to make sure that not sure what happened there. That's going to make sure that we have our text centered. Our text is going to be the right size at the medium breakpoint as well as the small breakpoint. It's going to have bold font. The letter spacing is going to be tighter. It's going to have the background gradient from black to this custom color. And the text is, of course, going to be transparent, and the background is going to be clipped to the text. All those styles are going to be applied as soon as we apply our section title class name. So I'm going to come back to my product showcase, ensure we have our section title class name applied there, and ensure that it still looks like it should, which of course it does. When we scroll down to our pricing section, we can also do the same thing here. We just need to bring that class name here as well. So I'm going to say section-title, and that's going to give me those styles right out of the box, which is great. Let's do the same thing with our section description. Come back to our product showcase, go ahead and copy and paste or cut, I should say, these styles out of here, except for the margin once again. We're going to bring that into globals.css, create a new component called section description. And with that component, we're of course going to apply the styles that we just copied. So that's going to be text center. It's going to set the text to the right size, make sure that the letter spacing is correct, and make it the right color. And that's all going to be encapsulated in this section description component. So let's save that globals.css file, come back to our product showcase, add in our section description component, ensure that that looks correct up here, which of course it does. And then once again, come back to pricing and say class name equals section description. Now that was a little bit of work, but it saved us a lot of effort. And of course, if these descriptions change, we can update those all in one place. That's going to be at our global.css file instead of updating it 5 or 6 times for the different sections that we're creating. So I'm going to close this out. I'm also going to close the previous product showcase out, and we'll once again focus on our pricing. Now I'm noticing that our padding is not yet correct. Of course, it's bumping up against the bottom of the page and the top or the bottom of the last section. So we need to add some styles for that. That's going to have a class name added on our section tag, and that's going to be PY24. That's going to give us the 96 pixels of padding top and bottom that we need. We also need to ensure that our title and description are split appropriately. And this is actually a great example of why we don't add our margin to the section title component that we created. And that's because we would have added unnecessary margin here. We don't have anything to change here. So here we needed to have that margin to push it away from the tag. But as we move down to this section, we don't need that margin on the top anymore, which is great that we didn't include this in our component layer. So because we didn't do that, of course, we can add our margin where we need it. And this at the description level is where we need it. We'll say MT5 here, and that will add the margin there. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and start creating our cards, our pricing cards, and let's go ahead and wrap those in another div. So I'm going to wrap those in a div, and this div right here that I'm creating is going to be the actual pricing card itself. Now we want to add the content first, and then we'll go into the different styles that we'll need to add to this. So we'll need to add a title onto this card. That's going to be right here. We'll go ahead and make it an H3 so that we can try and use semantic tags. And what we should probably do here is go ahead and map over our pricing tiers that we have here so that we're using the correct data points. So let me go ahead and add right here. I'll say pricing tiers.map, and then we can map over each of our tiers and add the data points correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and create that, and we're going to output this, which is going to be our pricing card. Now inside of this mapped value, that's where we get each object itself. So we'll have, if we scroll up, we can see that we'll have a title, we'll have a monthly price, button text, popular, inverse, and features. All 6 of those will be available to us here. So we can just go ahead and pull those out with title, monthly price, we can see we'll have a button text. We'll have popular to indicate whether it's popular or not. We'll have inverse to indicate whether the card is inverse or not. And then we'll have our features array. Now the title will go inside of our H3, so let's go ahead and put that title there and scroll down to see if we have that. Okay, we do have that. The next part is going to be our price itself. So let's go ahead and add a div wrapper for that price. And then inside there, we'll want a couple of span tags, one for the price because it's going to have different styles than the per month, which is going to stay static. So the price itself is going to be our monthly price. And that is, forgot to put my other bracket, monthly price. And that is going to be where we see our 0, 9, and 19. Of course, we're going to need the $sign before that. So we'll go ahead and put that $sign there. And that's going to make sure that that is there like it should be. Below that, we'll have a button. So that button is going to have whatever button text is indicated inside of our object. So we'll go ahead and put that there. And we can see that that button gets added correctly. And then below that, we have our features. So this is going to be probably a UL is going to be the best semantic tag for this. So UL, and then we'll go through our features. So we'll do a features.map. And for each of those features, which is just a string, we're going to go ahead and output something. And that's going to be an LI, and that'll be our actual feature itself. That is looking good. I'm seeing all the content that we need on the page. A couple of other things that we need to look at is, of course, we're going to need to handle these popular and inverse, but we'll worry about that after we get the first card created, so we can then modify that and make the inverse and popular cards. We also need to ensure that we have the feature checkbox or the check mark here. That icon, we can import that by going ahead and wrapping our feature in a span tag, or feature text, I should say. And then once we do that, we can go ahead and put the icon right here. So I'm going to go to the top of the file, and I'm going to import the check icon, and that's going to be from @assets/check.svg. That will ensure that we get that as a component. And then when we scroll back down, we can just go ahead and say check icon, and that should make that check icon show up. Now, of course, it's going to be too big, so we need to go ahead and add a class name of H6 to give it 24 pixels of height, and then W6 should give it the 24 pixels of width, and that should bring that right back down. Now, I know right now it looks like someone just puked content all over our page, and that's fine. Let's go ahead and start adding our styles to make these cards look like they should. The first thing we're going to start with is the actual wrapper itself, and that's going to have a class name of P10. That's going to give it 40 pixels of padding. We're also going to want to make sure that it has its border radius, and that's going to be rounded 3XL. It's also going to have a shadow, so that's going to be shadow, but it's going to be custom. So it's going to be 0 and then 7 pixels of Y value, 14 pixels of blur, and that's going to be a custom color of EA. That should create the correct shadow. The only other thing I'm seeing here is we also need a border. So let's make sure that we have the border there. And that border for the first card is going to be F1, F1, F1. So let me go ahead and add that color, the custom border color of F1, F1, F1. And that should make it the right color. Now both the border and the shadow are very light, so it is difficult to see those, but they are indeed there. So then that means we can move on to the content of the card. For our title, we're going to want to add a class name here as well, and it's going to be text large and font bold, and that's going to ensure that it shows up as it should. And it's also going to be the color text black/50 for 50% opacity and black. For the price, we'll go ahead and add a class name to that as well, and that's going to be text 4XL. Let's see how that looks. Of course, the font should be bold. The letter spacing should be tighter or tracking tighter. And we won't want to have any leading added from, line height added from our text 4XL. We're actually going to want this just to be our 36 pixels. So I'm going to say leading none, and that should take away that little bit of extra line height that's added automatically by our text 4XL class. For the description, our per month, we're going to add a class name to that as well, and that's going to be tracking tight to get the letter spacing down. We're also going to have font bold for that as well, and that's going to be text black 50 for our black with 50% opacity as well. Now we're going to want to flex these just so we have more control over the spacing between them, and that means that we're going to need to add a class to our wrapping div. So let's add a class name here, and that's going to be flex. We're going to make sure that the items are aligned baseline, which is a weird one, but not one that we can't use. So we have that capability for us, and we also want to make sure that our gap is 4 pixels between the two money and per month items, and that we have the right amount of margin. So it looks like it's going to be about 30 pixels. That's going to be a custom value of 30 pixels. Now that we're done with that, let's scroll down and work on our button. So our button, we already have some component class names for this. So let me try and add those on first, and then we'll adjust from there. So we have button primary, that should make it the black one, but of course we want this one to be full width. So we can add on to that by just saying width full, and that should allow our button to be across the entirety of that card. The other thing we need to do with our button is, of course, make sure that it has the proper amount of margin, and that's accomplished just by saying MT 30 pixels, and that should give it 30 pixels of margin to the top as well. For our unordered list, we can go ahead and come down and add a class on that as well. We're going to flex that in the column direction, so flex call. We're going to give that a gap of 5, and we also want the margin on top of that to be 32 pixels. And if we save that, we can see that that is correct. Now we just need to add a class name to our list item as well. And the class name there should be text small to make the font a little bit smaller. We're going to flex those left and right. We're going to align the items to the center, and we're going to split the text and the check mark by 16 pixels with gap 4. So as we look at what we've created so far, this is looking really good. Yes, we have had to create a lot of classes and add those to make these pricing cards look good, but the pricing cards are looking really good. The only thing that I'm seeing now is that, of course, our pricing cards aren't separated at all. It's kind of hard to see because we don't have the inverse one called out yet. And of course, we need to take care of our inverse and popular props as well. So let's go ahead and take care of a couple of those things now, and that should allow us to wrap up these pricing cards. So the next thing I'm going to look at is our popular tag, and we want to add that beside the title, but only if we have this popular prop set to true. So I'm going to wrap this. I'm going to pretend for a second that it's always true. So wrap this in a div and add a class name of flex and justify between, because of course we're going to want that to the popular tag to go to the other side of the page. And then here I'm going to go ahead and add a div for that tag, and that is going to say popular. And of course we're going to want to add some classes to that to style that up. Now this tag isn't going to be close enough to our other tags to use the tag component utility that we've already created. So let's go ahead and manually style this. This is going to be inline flex. It's going to be text small to make sure that the text is the right size. We're going to give this a padding left and right of 16 pixels with px4, a padding top and bottom of 6 pixels with py 1.5. We also want this to be rounded XL, which is going to give it a border radius of 12 pixels. And we of course want a border to be there. So let's go ahead and create a border as well. Now that border is actually going to be, because it's going to be on an inverse card, that border is going to be white. So that border is going to be border white /20, and then I'll create a white border with 20% opacity. So we're not even going to see that border until we add the inverse class names onto the card itself. Now to make sure that the rainbow effect is added onto the text, this is where we're going to add a span tag here, and that's going to ensure that we can create that rainbow effect. That class is going to look like this. We're going to use the same text clipping or background clipping rules that we've used on our other text, but this one is going to be a lot more pronounced because of course it's going to be rainbow colors. So let's go ahead and add that background. So background, and it's going to be custom linear gradient, and that's going to go to right, and that's going to have a few different colors. So the first one is going to be DD7, DDF. The second one is going to be E1CD86. Third is going to be our BB7. CB92. The fourth one is going to be 71C2EF. The fifth is going to be 3BFFFF. And we're going to end with the same one we started with, which is our DD7DDF. So let's see if that looks correct. And it does. I am seeing that rainbow gradient as soon as I save. So of course, now we just need to finish this out with the rest of the effect, which is of course to say that our text is transparent and that our background is clipped to our text. The font itself just needs to be a little bit bolder as well, and that is done with the font medium class name. Now it is difficult to see, and that's because we don't have our inverse card yet. So let's go ahead and handle this inverse prop as well. After we go ahead and, I forgot that we will need to go ahead and handle this popular prop. This isn't always going to happen. This is only going to be here when this popular prop is set to true. So all we need to do is have a popular check. So we'll say popular and then that's when we show this div right here. We actually don't need to change any of our other styles because this flex isn't going to matter if there's nothing to justify between. It'll still keep everything to the left. So you can see as we scroll up, when we don't have that popular tag there, it's not going to affect this text over here. The only thing we're going to do is we're going to add this when the popular is set to true. And to make sure that this is set to true, we can also just go ahead and triple equals true, and that will ensure that it's actually just set to true. Now, in order to handle our inverse prop, what we're going to want to do is essentially change the outer class names that we're using right here on our wrapping card. And so instead of having a background color of white or transparent, that we can change it to a background color and a border color of black. So let's go ahead and show you how that is done. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a utility called Tailwind Merge. So let's bring that in. We're going to import TW Merge, and that's going to be from Tailwind-Merge. Now what that does is it ensures that these class names don't conflict when we have things that might conflict with each other. It's just going to take the last one that we've defined. What I mean by that is if we were to say something like border black here, you can see that it's going to tell me, hey, these two are conflicting. So these are going to apply the same properties to each other. We don't want that to happen. So Tailwind Merge ensures that if we define this after we've already defined this, that it's going to ensure that we only take the second one that we've defined. So in order to use that, let's go ahead and remove our border black because it's not actually what we intended to do. And then for our class name, we're just going to say TW Merge, and we're going to keep the first ones that are there. But then we're going to also say that if we have the inverse set to true, then we're going to add some additional classes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a comma here. I'm going to say inverse equals true, and then we're going to add some additional classes on here. So this one is going to say border is going to be black, and also the background is going to be black, and the text is going to be white/60 by default. Now that doesn't look quite right. It looks like our text should actually just be white by default. My bad. So let me change that back, and we can see that that overall looks really good. There's a couple of things that aren't showing up though. The button, we need to change that around. We also need to change the text up here so that it shows as the right color. And that I think will be about it for our inverse card. So for this title, we can do the same thing we just did on our wrapping div by going ahead and giving this a different color when it's inverse. So we're going to use the same Tailwind Merge. We're going to say TW Merge and wrap our entire class name, and then we're going to say the same thing. We're just going to add a comma. We're going to say if inverse is equal to true, then we're also going to add in a text, a string with text white60, and that will add in that title like we needed. Now coming down to our button, we can do the exact same thing we just did. Let's go ahead and add in our TW Merge again. And let's say inverse equals true, and then we'll add in BG white text black, and I believe that should ensure that we have the right styles applied. And of course it looks like it does. So after we save, we can see that our inverse one is looking great. it's doing exactly what we want, while our light ones are taking the styles that they need to as well. So we're seeing really great pricing cards showing up on mobile right now. We're not seeing any spacing between these cards right now. I know, once again, it's hard to see because the border and the shadow are so light, but we're not seeing any spacing between these cards, so we need to add that in as well. And that's just going to be the wrapper around the different pricing tiers. This is going to be this one. We're going to say class name, and that's going to be flex. And of course, we're going to flex that in the column direction. And then we're also going to want to say that we need a gap there as well. That's going to be gap 6 for 24 pixels of gap. We want the items themselves to be centered. So let's say items center. And that's going to make these probably a little too small. So the pricing cards themselves should have a width of 100%, but a max width of, I believe it's about 320 pixels. So let's go ahead and add that in as well. So I'm going to say max width, I believe it's small. No, that's 384. That should be extra small. That'll give us the 320 that we wanted. And our width is going to be full. That should push out the pricing cards to the size that we actually want them to be in the design. After that, we just need to ensure that we have spacing between the cards themselves and the description. And that's going to be in our wrapping flex call. We just need to say MT10, and that should give us the 40 pixels of spacing between our cards and the description. On mobile, this is looking perfect, but let's see how we need to change this on tablet to make sure that we have our responsive styles in line. So if I look on tablet, we have the same problem that we had before with our description taking up too much space. So it seems like we might need to go ahead and make a separate component utility just for that wrapper that should hold in the title and the description. So let me go back to my product showcase and let me see what styles we've applied there. It looks like these are the styles that are applied that wrap our content, or at least our title and our description, to ensure that it's not taking up too much space. We need to apply the same thing here. So let me go ahead and just copy and paste this into our globals.css once again. Inside globals.css, we'll say section heading maybe. That'll be the class that we can use, the component class, and we'll apply the rules that we just cut from our div. We'll save that. Now, when we go back to our product showcase, we should be able to say section heading here, and that should keep that wrapped the way that we want. We can close those two out and come back to our pricing and then wrap this in a div. That class name is of course going to be section heading, and that will ensure that we have the space wrapper that we need to ensure that it's not going to take up too much space to the left and right. The other thing that I really love about what our tablet view is doing right now is, of course, it's automatically responsive using our section title and section description helpers that we already had in place. So we don't have to worry about changing this title because we already made sure that we took care of that with our component helper that we defined in our globals.css. Now we know that in the tablet view, these should still be stacked. So all of that still looks right to me. Let's see what it looks like on the desktop view. Over on the desktop view, we know that these should no longer be stacked. So that means that we need to come here and we need to apply a couple of large styles to say what should happen on the desktop view. So the first one should be when it gets to the large size, these should be flexed row instead of call. So that should ensure that they're lined up left to right. But now they're lined up centered. And of course we want that to be on the bottom. So we need to say large, and we need to set the align items to end, and that should ensure that they're lined up smallest to tallest. We also want to make sure that they're centered on the screen. It's probably a little bit hard to see. We'll say large, justify center, and that will ensure that they're centered on the screen. It's just a little bit of a shift, but certainly something that we want for a pixel perfect design. Let's zoom in a little bit and make sure that we look at all of our breakpoints at once using our horizontal view. So I'm going to go first on over to mobile. We'll scroll through that and scroll down to our pricing section. You can see that's looking beautiful. Scroll all the way down. We can see that that's all looking great. And if we go over to desktop, we can see that even in full size, this is looking exactly as it should. So right now we have a pixel perfect responsive pricing section, which means it's time to move on to the next section. Coming back into our design, now that we've done with the pricing section, let's look at what we're going to be creating for testimonials. We can see that we have a tag, title, and description, very similar to what we've already created. And then we have a bunch of testimonials as well. Now they're very similar. We can create some components or at least map over some data so that we can show all of these the way that we want to. On the desktop side, we're seeing that there are 9 showing at a time. On the tablet view, we're seeing 6, and of course on the mobile, we're seeing 3. So nothing too crazy there, but we will account for all of those different responsive views. And without further ado, let's dive into the code. Back in our code, let's go to our testimonials section, which is located under sections/testimonials. Now what you'll notice is that we already have our avatars imported and we already have our testimonials array. Each testimonial contains some text, an image source, a name, and a username. So we'll use this array of data in order to create our testimonials. Now to make sure everything is hooked up correctly, we want to replace null with a string, and we're going to call that testimonials. And then we're going to go into our app/page.tsx, and like the other sections, we're going to import this one. So we'll import testimonials from @/sections/testimonials, and then we'll drop that into our page as a testimonials component. Now, if we scroll down, we should see the word testimonials, which we do. Everything is hooked up correctly, which means we can dive into our testimonials section. Now, to start out with, like the other sections, we'll go ahead and create a semantic section tag. That section tag will hold a div with a class name of container because, of course, we don't want any of our content bumping up against the edges of the screen. And then inside that container, we know that we're going to have a title, so we can name that testimonials. If I could spell. We also are going to have a description, so we'll add that here. Or I apologize, this isn't testimonials, this is what our users say. So we'll go ahead and make sure that that text is updated from the design. And then the description, I'm going to go ahead and also copy that from the design. That's going to be from intuitive design to powerful features. Our app has become an essential tool for our users around the world. So we'll go ahead and copy that. And we also have a tag, and that's where the testimonials comes in. And we'll go ahead and put that testimonials text above there. So we already do have a few different utility classes that we can use for this. We know about those. So let's go ahead and drop those in. The first class name that we're going to add to here is tag. That should make that styled as a tag. This is going to have a class name of section title. This paragraph is going to have a class name of section description. And that should at least allow us to have some basic styles. And then we just need to make sure that our spacing in between and of course our alignment is correct. So I'm going to wrap the tag in another div with a class name of flex and justify center. That should make sure that it is centered on the page. And then for our title and description, we need to make sure that those have a margin top of 20 pixels each. So MT5 and MT5 should give those the spacing that they need to make sure that they are spaced appropriately. From there, let's work on our classes for our section. So our section is going to have a class name of BG white to ensure that the background is completely white. And we're also going to make sure that we don't have any padding on the top or bottom of this one. So that's going to be PY0. Now we don't necessarily have to add that in. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that and just leave it as the BG white. Now this is actually helping me understand why my styles looked the way they did on my last section. And it's because I forgot to put background white on my pricing section. That is actually made it a light blue. So I'm going to go back to my pricing section and I'm going to also add that BG white here. And that's going to help me make sure that my styles look correct. So that looks much better. The cards stand out much better as well. Very happy with the change that makes. But let's get back to our testimonials. I'm going to close out my pricing and of course close out my page because we don't need that right now. For testimonials, we want to split these into 3 columns. And the best way I can think to do that is to go ahead and do different slices of these. So in my first column, I can say const first column, and that's just going to be the first 3 of these. So I'm going to use testimonials, which is an array, and arrays have a slice function that you can use. And that slice function is going to allow us to take from 0 to the 3rd index. It's going to be the first 3. My second column is going to be the testimonials.slice again, but this time it's going to be from 3 to 6. And then my third one is going to be const third column, and that's going to be testimonials.slice, and that's going to be 6 through 9. And as we can see, in case you've never seen this slice function before, it basically returns a copy of the array from a start and end index and just returns those items. So I'm only returning the first 3, the second 3, and the third 3 with my different columns. Now, for the mobile view, all I really need to show is my first 3. So this makes it really easy. I'm just going to go ahead and come down here and create a div to wrap these. And then I'm going to say for my first column, I'm just going to go ahead and map over those, and that should give me my testimonial. And then for each one of those, I want to, of course, show some sort of a div here as well. And that's going to include my content for each testimonial. Now we can pull out the content keys themselves, and those are going to be text, image source, our name, and our username. And that's going to allow us to make sure that we have those. Now for my design, I can actually see that the testimonial cards and the pricing cards are very similar, which means once again, we could create a Tailwind utility class to allow us to encapsulate those in one spot. So I'm going to go back to my pricing section, and I'm going to take that outer wrapper of the card and see if I can encapsulate some of these same styles in my new card utility class. So let me copy these. Let me go over to globals.css and let me create a card class. That card class is going to apply the styles that we just had here. So we're going to apply the same amount of padding, the same border. I don't think I need this border solid rule, by the way. A border 222/10, border radius. It'll apply the same shadow, apply the same max width and the same width. So all those rules we actually want in our card utility class. I'm going to save that, come back to pricing, and make sure that we just replace this with a simple class of card. And then we also have the inverse here, which adds some additional classes on. Since we're not creating any more inverse classes, I don't think we need another utility class for this. I think we can just leave this alone and let this be what it is. With that in place, let's go back to our testimonials. And for each item in the first column, let's go ahead and add the class name of card. And that should allow us to at least have some starter styles in order to create each of our testimonials. And those are looking perfect. Those are looking great. Inside each of those cards, we also want to have our content. So we're going to create a div, and that content is going to have the text. So the text is going to go right there. And then below the text is going to go the avatars, of course, the names and the usernames. So we're going to have a div that's going to surround both of those, or all three of those, I should say. And then on the left is going to be the image itself. So let's see if we can use next/image for that. We're going to have a source of image source. An alt tag is going to be kind of hard, but let's see if we can just use their name for that. So let's see, alt equals name. And the height and width are both going to be 40 pixels if I'm not mistaken. So that means we need to add a class name here of h10 width 10, and of course rounded full to ensure that we have full rounding, a full border radius that we need around that image. After I add the ending tag, we can just save that. It looks like we have a problem somewhere. And it's because we used a string source that the image can't automatically pull in the width. So we need to go ahead and say width equals 40, and that should allow the width to get to the image correctly. And of course, the height is also going to be 40. Once we've done that, we can see that next image does display the image correctly. So beside the image, we want to go ahead and have another wrapping div, and that div is going to have both the name and the username. So let me go ahead and add a div for the name, and let me end that. And then we're also going to have a div for the username, and we're going to have an ending div there. Now let's see if we can style these appropriately. So we need to have a class name of flex. That's going to ensure that what we can do is flex these in the column direction. We also want to have a flex class name on the wrapping div around the image and the name and username. So we'll say flex there. And of course, that's going to be in the row direction. We want to align the items to the center. So items center is going to be what we're going to add there. We want a gap of 8 pixels, so we can say gap 2, and we want the margin between that and the text above it to be 20 pixels, so we can use MT5 as the class there. Now we just need to add a couple more classes to the name and username, so let's go ahead and do that. The class name for the name needs to have font medium to make that a little bolder than the regular. It also needs to have tracking tight to give that letter spacing that it needs. And we want the leading to be set specifically to 20 pixels. That just makes the name and the username the same, because we're going to add a class name of leading 5 on this as well, and tracking tight. Now that we've done that, we can see that our testimonial cards are looking great, but of course they don't have any spacing in between them yet, and it also doesn't have any spacing up here on the top. So both of those need added in. In order to do that, we'll just go ahead and flex our column wrapper. So we're going to say class name equals flex call, and that's going to flex that in the column direction. And then there is where we're going to add our gap. So that's going to be a gap of 24 pixels, and that's going to split those testimonials apart. And then we can also ensure that we have the right margin on the top by saying MT10. That should add the margin to the top. So now our mobile testimonials section is looking pretty good. The one thing I'm noticing, there's a couple things that I'm noticing, and one of them is that we don't yet have our mask over the top that's going to fade out the testimonials at the top and the bottom. We need to go ahead and add that in there. And then the second thing is there's no padding on the bottom yet, and we might not need that, but let me go ahead and make sure via the design that we don't. So let's go ahead and take care of the first problem. The first problem is that we don't have the white fade out and fade in, and that we can take care of by adding a mask on our flex column. So I'm going to add a mask image rule here, and we're going to say linear gradient, and that's going to be to the bottom. It's going to go from transparent to black, and then to transparent, or excuse me, black again, and then transparent, because we're going to set where our actual cutoffs are for each of those percentages. So this is going to be black 25%, this is going to be black 75%, and then we're going to have back to transparent again. So let's see if that actually adds the correct mask on there. And indeed it does. We can see that the top one is starting to fade out. We have a testimonial that's showing, and then the bottom one is fading out again. That's exactly the effect we were trying to achieve. And like I said, you can still copy and paste through this. This is a great way to add masks to have things fade out on the screen. Now that our testimonials section is looking good in mobile, let's ensure that our responsive styles are correct as well. So let's go over to the tablet view and see what's going on with our testimonials. Now, the first thing I'm seeing is that we're not aligning these testimonials to the center. So even though there's one column right now, when there's two columns, we still want those aligned towards the center. So we need to ensure that we have the proper wrappers there. So I'm going to add a div with a class name of flex, and that's going to be the wrapper that we use to control how these are aligned. So we'll say justify center, and that will ensure that our testimonials, how many ever columns we have, that are there aligned towards the center. And of course, if we have more than one, we're going to want to put a gap between those as well. So we'll say gap 6 here. That should ensure that if we have more than one, we can do that properly. Now we could copy and paste this whole thing and put it down here like so, and then save that, and we'd have two columns. However, that's a lot of duplicated code. And anytime in React that you have duplicated code, you normally want to break it out either into the utility component classes that we've already created, but this is a bit more than a class. This should really be a true React component. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo what I just did with my code, and I'm going to, instead of copying and pasting this 3 times for 3 columns, I'm going to actually create a component with this. And in order to do that, I'm just going to cut that out, and I'm going to come above my testimonials page component, and I'm going to create a new testimonials. I'll call it a testimonials column. And that's going to take some props, which right now are unknown, and it's going to return a testimonials column. Now, of course, we're going to dynamically set what those testimonials are. So inside of props, we're going to take in a testimonials, or excuse me, we'll just go ahead and call this props for now because that's going to help us with TypeScript. And we're just going to say that it's going to say testimonials, and that's going to be type of testimonials. And that essentially is saying that this props is going to include a testimonials prop, and that's going to have a type of the array that we're passing in right here. So essentially it's going to have an array that looks like this, just so TypeScript is happy. When we grab that, we just need to call this props.testimonials.map, and that will essentially make sure that we can pass in our testimonials like we want to. Now, when I save this, our testimonials are going to disappear, but that's fine. We know how to get them back. We just need to pass our testimonials that we want into each of these columns and include these columns inside of our flexed container. So we'll have testimonials column here, and it's going to include a testimonials prop of first column. And let's make sure that that column shows up correctly, and it does, which is encouraging. So let's go ahead and do that for the second column as well. Second column, and let's see if we get 2 columns. And indeed we do. So that's really helpful. They're also pushed towards the center because, of course, we went ahead and used this flexed container to do that. So that's looking pretty good on tablet. The problem, though, is that when we go back to mobile, we're also going to see both columns. So that's not what we want. We actually want to hide those until we get to the to the tablet size. And that just means we need to also pass a class name prop so that we can modify what is shown and what is hidden at each particular screen size. So I need to go ahead and also add a class name prop here. That class name prop is going to be a string, and it doesn't have to be there. That's why I put the question mark there. So it can be a string or undefined. And we're going to use our same Tailwind merge function to ensure that if it is there, we're going to merge it with the classes that we already have. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. That's going to be right here, and we're going to pass in a class name. So essentially it's going to take this class name prop and it's going to pass it into this Tailwind merge function. Of course, I have to include Tailwind merge. So let me go ahead and just hit enter there. That should include Tailwind merge. And this should also be called props.className, not just class name, because we haven't destructured that object. So let me go ahead and scroll back down to our testimonials and ensure, okay, we do have a class name and we can pass that through. So now my second column, I only want to show up at the medium screen size. So now I can pass that a class name prop and say that it is hidden by default, but when it gets to medium, then we're going to go ahead and display that as flex. So when I go back to my mobile size, we can see that that shows up properly. It's only showing up with 1 column. In my tablet size, we can see that it shows up with 2 columns. So that's showing up exactly as we want it to. And of course, to continue this same idea, when we get to desktop, we want to show the 3rd column as well. So let's go ahead and create another testimonials column. We'll pass in the 3rd column of testimonials, and we're going to say at large, we're going to show that as flex instead of medium. So it's not going to show up on the tablet, but it will show up on the desktop size. The only thing that I'm seeing that seems to be out of whack is that we don't yet have our content container around our title and description. And of course our tag, we can put it around there too. So I'm going to go ahead and create another div. It's going to be our wrapper, around our tag, our title, and our description. And we're going to use that same utility class that we created earlier. For this, it's just going to have a class name of section header, and that should create the container around there. Let me save that and make sure that that does indeed take effect. And excuse me, it looks like that was called section heading, not section header. So that was why that wasn't taking effect, but that looks like it's fixed now, and we're back in business. As another check, let me go ahead and pull out my view here and ensure that everything looks the way that it should on the big screen. So let me go ahead and change this to a horizontal view like we've done before, and then we'll look at all of the views at once and ensure that we have the styles that we're looking for. So on mobile, it looks amazing. On tablet, I'm seeing it still looking great. And as I scroll over to my desktop view, everything is still looking as it should. So this looks really good. The responsive styles are completely done, and we are moving on to the next section. Now that our testimonials responsive section is done, let's move on to the next section, which is our call to action. So this section is pretty simple. It has a title, a description, a couple of buttons. I think we have most of the styles that we're going to need already as utility classes in order to create this. And of course, we see that there are a couple of images that are to the left and right of our desktop and our tablet view. On mobile, we're not seeing those same things, so we're just going to have to go ahead and create our mobile view like this, and then we can add the images in as we get to our tablet and our desktop view. Once we get to the effects part, this is going to be a lot of fun because we're going to add some parallax animations to these images. But for right now, let's go ahead and dive into the code. Back in our code, let's go into sections, and we're going to open up call to action. Here, we're going to put the string call to action just to double check everything is working. We're going to bring this into our page.tsx file by importing call to action from @sections/call to action. And of course, we're going to put our call to action component at the bottom of our homepage. If everything's correct, as it looks like it is, then we have the call to action at the bottom of the page. So that means we can go back into our call to action component and get started on our code. In order to create this, we'll start with the semantic section tag like we have the other times. We'll also give this a div class name equals container to ensure that our container is wrapping our content in this section. We want an h2 for the section title. That is going to have the content of sign up for free today. We also want to have a paragraph here. I'm going to copy and paste this from the design. It says, celebrate the joy of accomplishments with an app designed to track your progress and motivate your efforts. We don't want that extra space there, so we'll take that out. And we're also going to have a couple of buttons. So we'll have a div around these buttons, and we're going to have a button 1 that says get for free, and a second button which says learn more. We don't want that M to be capitalized, so I'm going to go ahead and take that away. Okay, now that we have the content, we can go ahead and start to create some of the styles to make this section look as it should in the mobile view. The first thing I'm going to start with is the section tag itself. So I'm going to add a class name to this. I'm going to say it has a background gradient. So I'm going to say BG gradient to the bottom, and it's going to start from white, and it's going to go to the custom value of D2DC FF, and that will create the gradient that we're looking for, and that blends it with the section above it. We also want to add a little bit of padding, so this section is going to have PY24. That will add the padding top and bottom that we need there. Now that we've done that, we need to ensure that our content has the right class names, so we're going to come into our H2 and say class name equals section title. That should give that the class name that it needs. We're going to also say class name on this paragraph is section description. That should be what that needs. And then down with our buttons, we're going to give these classes as well. So class name equals BTN primary. And this other one is going to be class name equals BTN dash text. And that should take care of most of the styles for that. Now we just have a couple of spacing issues that we already knew we were going to encounter, so we need to go ahead and flex our buttons together. So class name equals flex. That will allow us to control the gap, which is of course 8 pixels. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We're also going to put some margin on this. So MT10 should give us our 40 pixels of margin that we needed there. And we're going to justify these buttons to the center to ensure that they align to the center of our section. We just need a couple more things to tighten this up. One of those is making sure that our description is split from our title. So that's just going to have the MT5 class, and that's going to ensure that our description is aligned appropriately. Now that was really quick, but in that short amount of time, because of our utility classes, we were able to easily get this section created. Now let's go ahead and look at our responsive views and see what else we're going to have to add in order to make this work. But before I do that, one more thing I forgot about, which is my arrow next to my Learn More button. It's in the design, but we don't currently have it in the code. So let's go ahead and import that arrow, and we'll put that by our Learn More button. So let me go ahead and import the arrow right from @/assets/arrowright.svg, and then we're going to wrap Learn More in a span tag just to be able to control the text itself. And then we're going to add our arrow right next to it. And that arrow right is going to have a class name. It's 20 pixels by 20 pixels. So H5 width 5, that will make sure it's the right size. And then we just need to add a little gap in between the text and the arrow itself. Now that we've taken care of that problem, now we can go over to our tablet view. So I'm going to click on tablet, and let's see what we're looking at in our tablet view. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so that we can see it a little better. The first thing I'm noticing is that once again, the text is going too wide. We need to constrain that somehow. So I'm going to go ahead and add that div, that wrapper div around our H2 and our paragraph, our title and our description, and give that a class name of section heading, I believe is the one that we need. That should allow us to make sure that it is constrained appropriately. The other thing that we need to do is ensure that our images are lined up correctly as well. So we need to import the images that we need for the left and right. So I'm going to import my star image, and that's going to come from @/assets/star. And I'm also going to import my spring image, and that's going to come from assets/spring.png. I also need to bring in my next/image. So I'm going to import image from next/image. That will allow me to place these where I need to. Now these are going to be relative to the section heading itself. So I'm going to put a relative class right here, and then I'm going to put these absolute images inside of this same container. So I'm going to say image source equals, I'm going to start with the star image. I'm going to give this an alt tag of star image. It's going to have a width of 360 pixels. And then for the class name, we're going to modify that in a second, but I'm just going to go ahead and get this on the page. We know that it's going to be absolute right now. It's just showing up below the content itself. So let me go ahead and give that absolute, and that will allow us to go ahead and move that around where we need to. Now it looks like from the left corner or the left side of our content, it's going to go 350 pixels to the left. So I'm going to say negative left 350 pixels. That's a custom value. And then from the top, it's going to go 137 pixels up. So negative top 137 pixels should do the trick. Let me ensure that that goes the right direction. It looks like it does. And also I want to ensure that it's not going to overflow this container to the left or the right. So I'm going to go ahead on this section and say that if we have overflow, we're going to overflow X clip to ensure that we don't have any kind of unnecessary overflow. Now that we've done that, let's put in our second image. So this one is image source equals spring image. It's going to have an alt of spring image. It's going to have a width of 360, just like the last one. And the class name is going to be very similar. It's going to be absolute. And then we'll look at the design to see where we actually need to stick this spring image. And it looks like from the right, we're sticking this 331 pixels from the right side. And then from the top, we're bringing it up 19 pixels from the top. So far, this is looking great. Once again, our utility classes are helping us by already fixing our title size for us. So let's go ahead and see how this looks on desktop by just clicking our desktop tab here. We're going to stretch this out just a bit more so that we can zoom in on this desktop view and we can see how everything looks. And right now, from what I see, it looks really good. So I'm happy with how this desktop view looks. Let's look at this in our horizontal view with seeing all three views together and see if there's anything we've left out. Let me scroll all the way down. And as I look through the different views, it looks like it's looking good. So I don't have any complaints about how this is looking right now. I think we've done a great job with our responsive views, which means that now it's time to move on to the last section of the page, which is the footer. Now that we've come this far, the last part that we need to design or create is going to be the footer. So it's a pretty simple footer. We have a logo, we have a couple of nav items, and then we have some social icons and a copyright section. So that's pretty simple. And as we move into our tablet view, that looks essentially the same. And on mobile, it looks like we flex our nav items to the column direction instead of the row. So all of that should be pretty simple to execute on. Let's go ahead over to the code and let's get started. As with our other sections on the page, let's go ahead and open up the sections folder and dive into the footer.tsx file. We're going to return the string of footer from this component, and then we're going to go into app/page.tsx and make sure we import that footer component from @/section/footer, and then drop that footer into the bottom of our page. If we've done that correctly, we should notice the text of footer in our browser, which we do, which means that we can come back into our footer component and go ahead and start creating the code. The first thing we're going to create is the semantic footer tag, and then inside that we're of course going to want a class of container to contain our content. For our content, we're going to want the logo at the top. So I'm going to import that logo. I'm going to import the logo from @/assets/logosas.png. And then I'm going to just go ahead and bring that in with next image. If I start using it and select the right one, hit enter, and then go ahead and use that, then that will automatically import from my IDE. And then the source is going to be logo. The height is going to be 40. The alt tag is going to be SaaS logo. And that should allow that to load on the page. After that, we have our navigation. So let me go ahead and create a semantic nav tag, and then I'm going to create 6 different links, and those different links I'm going to add the correct text to after I've copied and pasted those. So we have about, we have under that features, then customers, pricing, help, and careers. Let's scroll down and make sure that those are showing up, and they are, which means that we can move down to our social icons. Now, since these icons are SVGs, it's easy enough for us to go ahead and import those as SVGs. So I'm going to go ahead and import my social X icon from @/assets/social X. I'm going to do the same thing with my other icons. So we've got our social Insta from @/assets/social Insta. Same thing for my social LinkedIn from @/assets/social LinkedIn. Also importing my social pin from @/assets/social pin. And then we have, last but not least, social YouTube, and that's coming from @/assets/social YouTube. So those are the social icons that I need. I'm going to go ahead and wrap those in a div so that we can make sure that we can control the spacing of those. And then I'm going to use some browser niceties to copy and paste the names of these into this location. And then I can also use those same niceties to make sure that those are each their own component. Let's ensure that they're showing up on the page, and indeed they are, which means that we can move down to our copyright paragraph. And that paragraph is just going to say, copyright 2024, your company, Inc., all rights reserved. That does it for our content, which means it's time to add the styles with our Tailwind utilities. So I'm going to start with the wrapper itself. We know that we're going to have a background of black, so I'll start there. And our text is going to be a custom color of BC, BC, BC. It's also going to be text small by default. And we also know that we need a little bit of padding top and bottom. That's going to come in with PY10 to give that 40 pixels of padding top and 40 pixels of padding bottom. We can also go ahead and add a text center rule here. Hopefully that should allow everything to align to the center automatically and just make it a little bit easier as we move down the page. The next thing we can do is go ahead and adjust our image. Now our image shows up because it has a background gradient with a blur, and I want to make sure that that's included. The easiest way to go about this is going to be to go ahead and wrap this image in a container, and that container is going to be inline flexed. That's going to be a container that then just wraps right around the image, and then we can set this container to relative, which will allow us to put anything in that as position absolute. Now we don't have to create another div behind here, although we certainly could. We can just use something as simple as a before element. So I'm going to say before, and I'm going to set the content of that to just an empty string, and that's going to allow that before element to show up. And then we can start modifying it with our Tailwind CSS rules. So we can say before that the height is going to be full. We can also say that the width is going to be full and that the background color is, for now, I'm just going to say red 500 to see if it shows up. And of course, we'll need to position that absolute. Once we do all that and save it, we do see that it is showing up, which means that our before element is on the page, which is what we needed to know. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and come back and go ahead and give this a custom linear gradient. So I'm going to say linear gradient here. And we're going to say that that gradient goes to the right, and it's going to go from F87 BFF. It's going to pass through FB92 CF through FFDD9B, also through C2F0B1, and then last but not least, to FD8FE. And let's save that and see if that shows up correctly. It does, which means that we can put this behind our image very simply by just going to our image and going ahead and giving that a class name of relative. Now, of course, this does have a blur and it doesn't take up the whole size of the container. So instead of saying height full and width full, which isn't actually true, we can just go ahead and give this some different values. So let's say before top 2 and before bottom 0, and that should allow it to be aligned in the right position. And then we also want this to be blurred, so let's go ahead and give this a before blur, and that should give it that 8 pixels of blur that we need in order to show the entire logo. Now that we've gotten that taken care of, let's move on to the navigation. So in the navigation, we know that this needs to be aligned top to bottom, so let's go ahead and give that a class name of flex to make sure that it's displayed flex, and then flex call to ensure that it goes in the column direction. After we've done that, we know that they need to be split by 24 pixels, so let's give that a gap of 6, and we also need to push the nav away from the image by 24 pixels, so we'll say MT6 to give that 24 pixels of margin top as well. That's looking great. Let's move on to our social icons. For our social icons, we need to add a class name of flex again, just to be able to control these much more easily. We're going to say justify to the center to ensure that they move to the center of the screen. And then we'll go ahead and give those a gap of 6 as well to ensure that they're split by 24 pixels. We can also add a margin of 6 to ensure that the margin top is 24 pixels as well. With those knocked out, that just leaves us our paragraph here at the bottoms, and we're going to go ahead and give that a class name of MT6 to push that by 24 pixels once again. Now that we've finished our mobile styles and everything is looking good on mobile, let's switch over to tablet and see if everything still looks good over there. I'm going to slide my tablet view out a bit so that I can get a better look. And we see that the only thing that I'm seeing that needs to change is going to be this navigation. At the tablet size, we don't want this to be going top to bottom anymore. Now we want the nav going left to right. So what we need to say is medium flex row, and that should allow us at the medium size to go ahead and flex that to the row direction. And then we also need to say justify center to ensure that our navigation items are pushed towards the center. That is all of the tablet styles. Now let's move on to desktop and see if everything still looks good. And once again, I'm going to pull this out a little bit more just to be able to take a closer look. It does look like everything looks good at this screen size as well, which means it's time for us to just go through, make sure we didn't miss anything or that nothing was broken by looking at all of our screens at once. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and look and see mobile looks great. The tablet view looks great. And as we scroll over to the desktop, we can see that everything is aligned. Everything looks perfect there, which means our responsive footer styles are complete. Now that we've completed all of our sections and we've made all of our sections responsive, now it's time to actually dive into the effects that are really going to make this page pop. And in order to do that, we're going to work mostly from the tablet view just so we have a balance between the size of the code screen and the actual view itself. And we'll switch over to desktop when we need to modify some of those elements as well. Now, what we're going to bring in is Framer Motion. And in order to kind of see some of the documentation for this, I'm just going to go ahead and bring up the Browse tab inside of Polypane and look at the documentation for Framer Motion, especially the introduction, just so it can give you a brief overview of what Framer Motion's all about. So Framer Motion is a React component library that we can install with npm install Framer Motion. Now it's already installed in the template, so that's not something we have to worry about. But then when we're importing this, all we need to do is go ahead and import Motion from Framer Motion, and this allows us to use the Motion component. So as it shows, we can use the Motion component, and in fact, we can replace any of the HTML or SVG elements with their corresponding Motion components, and that will allow us to add different props that allow us to animate that component. So you can see it's very easy for us to add animation props, and we also have a flexible transition prop that allows us to configure that animation completely. So knowing that, let's go ahead and close our browser and let's go ahead and open up our code and start implementing this in the hero section. So I'm going to go to hero.tsx and close out that sidebar just to give us a little bit more space in the code. And then we're going to import Motion from Framer Motion. Now the first thing we're going to take a look at is the cog icon. So instead of our next/image component, we're actually going to use a Framer Motion, and we're going to turn this into a motion.img. Now that does change our source because it can no longer be static image data. Now it has to be the actual source string. So all we need to do is change our cog image to cogimage.src, and that'll give us the source of that image. After we do that and save, we can see that nothing on the page has changed except for the fact that Next.js does not allow client components when we haven't told it that this is a client component that we're creating. So we need to come up to the top of our file and we need to say use client, and that will allow us to use Framer Motion's client components. As soon as I save that, it should refresh and bring us back to the page as it was. Now, the layout of the page hasn't changed, but what the motion.image component has allowed us to do is now add some motion effects to this cog image that we added this to. So now we have the ability to add some additional props to this, and we're going to start with what we actually want to happen. Now what we want to happen is, let's go ahead and first experiment with this just using static TailwindCSS classes. So we'd like to have this move up and then down and then come back to center. So let's see what, for example, if we move it up, we could use negative translate Y, and then we could do something like 30 pixels and then save that, and that'll move that up 30 pixels. And of course, if we take the negative translate and turn that into a positive translate, that'll move that down 30 pixels. And that's essentially what we want to do. We'd like to take it from 0 to negative 30, back to 0 to positive 30, then back to 0 again. So that's going to be the full transition. Let's go ahead and add that. Let's remove those classes from TailwindCSS, and then we'll add that as an animate prop. We're going to set the animate prop to go from translate Y, and we're going to say that it goes from -30 to 30. And then for our transition, we're going to set this so that we have a different repeat. So we want this to repeat infinitely. We don't just want it to happen once. So we say repeat infinity. We're going to use a repeat type of mirror so that we have it going back and forth. So once it gets from -30 to 30, then it's going to go from 30 to -30 and back again. So that's going to allow that to happen. And then the duration is going to be, let's see, probably about 10 seconds. Let's see what that looks like and see if everything happens like we want it to. So let me go ahead and refresh this page. Let's see if we have the animation that we want. The duration seems a little slow, so I'm going to change that to 5 and see if we have that working yet. And it's still a little slower than I'd like, so I'm going to actually bring that down to 2 and see if we get the effect that we're after. Now, the only thing that is a little weird on this is that our ease isn't set correctly, so I'm going to say ease, and I'm going to set it to ease in out, and that's going to give it a much smoother start and stop there. So let me go ahead and refresh this page once again and see if we get a smoother start stop, and indeed we do. I'm going to slow this down just a tad, set this to a duration of 3 seconds, refresh the page and see where we're at. And that's looking perfect right there. That really is that nice, just kind of eye-catching, almost breathing motion for our cog. That's exactly what we wanted. Let's make sure that that looks good on desktop as well, and then we can move on to our next part. So as I switch over to desktop, let me zoom in here a little bit so we can see the full desktop view to give us the best view that we can get. And that just looks impressive. It looks amazing. It's exactly what we wanted to create with this hero section. Let's scoot this back in and go back to our tablet view, and let's put this somewhere in the center here just so we can see. I'd like to see 100% of our tablet view if we can. So let me go ahead and set this down a little bit more. There we go. We've got that all lined up. So let's go ahead and switch our cylinder and noodle images to use a parallax effect. In order to do that, there's a couple of things that we need to import from Framer Motion as well, and this is going to be use scroll. So the use scroll hook allows us to get the scroll position and then change the position of other elements or animations based on that use scroll hook. So let's go ahead and import that. I'm going to use a const of scroll y progress, and that I'm going to get from my use scroll hook. And my use scroll hook also takes some options. So I have to know what exactly I'm targeting as for my scroll position. Really what I'm targeting is the hero section itself. I want to know how much that hero section has scrolled. So I'm going to say target, and then we need to give this a React ref. Now a React ref we can bring in by using our use ref, and so I'm going to say const hero ref equals my use ref from React. So if I hit enter there, it should import that correctly. And then I need to set this on my section. So I need to set this as a prop. I'm going to say ref equals hero ref, and that's going to tie together this use ref with this element right here. Now my target is going to be that hero ref, and I'm going to say that my offset is going to be start, end, and then end, start. And essentially what this offset is saying, let me double check that this is, oh yeah, I need to give this a default value of null. That will take care of that. So essentially what this start end and end start is saying is that when the start of my hero reaches the end of the window, so that's actually never going to happen because we can't scroll down that far, but if the start of this hero was scrolling up and it reached the end of the window, that would be the start of the scroll Y progress. And then when it ends, that's going to be when the end of that hero reaches the start of the window. So that's going to be about this position. So we're only going to track it from those two positions, and then this is going to give us a number between 0 and 1. Now, since we don't want to actually move these only 0 or 1 pixels, we're going to want to transform that 0 and 1 using the use transform hook. So I'm going to bring in the use transform hook, and that's going to allow us to transform that value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const translate y. I'm going to set that to use transform of our scroll y progress. And we're going to transform as the value goes from 0 to 1, we're going to actually go from 150 to negative 150. So that's going to track that 0 to 1 value, and it's going to transform that to that range of essentially 300 different numbers. Now we can use another hook in order to see what this value actually is and look in our dev tools and see what's being changed. So I can actually say use motion value event, and when I import that, let's go ahead and use this. So use motion value event. And so I'm going to look at the motion value of scroll Y progress. I'm going to say whenever that changes, let's go ahead and log that out. So I'm going to get the latest value. And all I'm going to do is go ahead and console.log that latest value. Now, in order to actually see that value, let me come over and open up my DevTools. I'm going to go to the Edit tab, and I have the console open. So as we scroll, I'm going to see the different values as they come through. So we're right now about halfway through that particular hero section. As we continue to scroll, it's going to go to almost 1, if not all the way to 1 as we scroll. Okay, so there's our 1. That means we've totally scrolled through it. And as we go back up, we're not going to get to 0 because we can't scroll past this particular hero section. We can only get to about 0.44. So we know that we can transform this from 0 to 1. We can also look at this translate Y value. So if I put the same thing in here and use my motion event here and go ahead and just paste that in, that means that when we reload the page, which I'll do right here, I can see that that would then go from 17, and I'm going to see negative 39, negative 115. So that's the value that we're actually going to set as the translate Y on these elements to ensure that they have that great parallax effect. So let me go ahead and remove that use motion value event because that was just to show you what that looks like. Let me go ahead and close out my console, and then I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to my cylinder image and add this on here. Now we know that we need to replace our next/image with motion.img, and we're also going to replace our source with cylinderimage.src to give us the string source of that image. Nothing changes yet because we haven't added on any of our values here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add on a style tag, and we're going to say the translate Y value is going to be equal to our translate Y that we have up top. So the translate Y of that one is going to be equal to our motion value that we just set up top based on the scroll position. So as we scroll, we can see that that cylinder moves along with that scroll. That looks great, but of course it's only going to scroll for a little bit before we reach the part of the page where the user can't see that anymore. So the noodle is really what they're going to see, especially in the desktop view. So let's go ahead and change that over as well. And we're going to use the same translate to scroll it with the same parallax effect. So let me go ahead and change this to motion.img as well. Let's change our noodle image to noodleimage.src, and let's set the style tag to translate Y and set this to the translate Y value there as well. So we have that set, and then in order to see that, we're going to pull out the desktop view and go ahead and just open this up a little bit so that we can see what's going on. One of the things that's interesting about this motion value is it's actually going to override what we set with our rotation because it uses the same transform. So transform controls rotation, it controls translation in the X and Y direction, and so we actually need to go ahead and set this on this as well. So we're also going to say rotate, and I believe we're going to have to say 30, or actually we can just give this a number of 30, and that will allow that to be rotated as well. So this is going to control the rotation, which is just going to be a static number, that's fine, and then it's going to change this translate dynamically based on the user's scroll position. Let me pull this out a little more so we can see this. I want to see this 100%, this full great parallax effect. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down, and we can see that indeed, yes, our noodle does change. It goes from overlapping the last section to overlapping our cog a little bit, and just gives it an excellent, amazing, eye-catching effect. that wraps up our animation for this particular section. If we want to go over and we want to see this in all 3 panes, let me just go ahead and open this all the way up. Let me switch to the horizontal view, and then we're going to see what these motion values do in all 3 screens. So as I scroll down here, we even see that this is going up and down a little bit, which is a cool effect for mobile. As we scroll over to the tablet view, we can see that we still get our great parallax effect with our cylinder. And then when we go to the desktop view, we once again see multiple parallax effects as well as our cog effect going on. So all those look really, really nice, and it's adding a great effect. We're done with the animations in the hero section, which means it's time to move on to our next section. Now that we're done animating our hero section, let's scroll down to the logo ticker, and what we'd like to do is have the logos scroll from left to right, or excuse me, from right to left infinitely, and as they scroll, we'd like them to appear on the right side of the screen and disappear on the left side of the screen. Now, our mask image that we already have set up is going to control the appearance and disappearance of those logos, as long as we can just get this interior div to move to the left. So let's go over into our logo ticker.tsx, and just to give us a little bit of extra room, I'm going to go ahead and close out that sidebar, and we're going to focus on the code. Now, as we've done in our other sections, we need to bring in motion, and we know that when we do that, we're also going to need to make sure that this is a client component, which allows us to use client-side effects like use state and other things that will help us to add client-side effects to our component. Now, what we're going to be doing is essentially taking this interior flexed component, and we're going to replace that with a motion div, and we're going to translate it to the left. So let's try that by just replacing this div with motion.div. And of course, we need to have our ending motion.div set as well. So that means that is replaced. As soon as I save my page, nothing changes yet because we haven't done anything, but let's go ahead and start our animation. So in order to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to add an animate prop, and the animate prop is going to say it's going to translate X, and that's going to be, let's try -100%. Let me hit save and see what happens to our logos. That happens really quickly. Let's slow that down a bit so we can see that. Let me go ahead and add a transition prop to control that transition, and we're going to say duration for now. Let's just say 5 and save that again to see if we can get that to reload. When I hit the reload button, let's see how that happens. So it does look like it does scroll through all of our logos, but of course there's a couple of things we need to change. In order to make an infinite effect and be able to see all of the logos, that means we actually need to have 2 sets of these logos. So I'm actually going to copy and paste these like so. So copy, come down a couple of spaces just so I can know what's going on, and then paste that. And I'll even add a separate comment that says something like second set of logos, and that will help me understand what's going on here, and say for animation. Now that we have that done, let me go ahead and save and reload my browser again and see if we can see this effect going on. So it does go through both sets of logos. Of course, we only want that to go through one set of logos and then repeat. That's what turns this into an infinite animation. So if we scroll back up to our transition, what we're going to say is this is going to repeat infinitely. So repeat infinity. And we also want this to have an ease of linear so that it doesn't slow down or speed up at the ends. That should make it much easier to see. And since we only want half of the logos to actually show, or half of them to translate and then start over, that means instead of going -100%, we actually want this to be -50%. So once it goes from -50%, and we can see this going back the other direction, that's definitely not what we want. Let's change this repeat type to loop so that we get the repeat type working the way that we want, and refresh our page and see if we've been able to set this up correctly. So we can see that they're going over to the left linearly, and there's a slight jump. And that's because even though these are split by 56 pixels, there's no other additional 56 pixel gap at the end. In order to add that, we're also going to need to say PR 14, that's going to add the additional spacing that we need in order to make this look seamless. So once I refresh my browser, I should see a seamless effect going to the left, and it should look like it's happening infinitely. And that's just because it's an optical illusion. It goes left by -50%, starts back at 0 again, and goes left by -50% again to infinity. Now, in order to slow this down and just make this look like a smoother effect, let's set this duration to 20. After we refresh our page, that should make our animations just look so smooth. And this really is a beautiful effect, going from the disappearing on the left to the disappearing on the right, coming in, going out. It really adds a touch of polish to this page that is going to catch someone's eye and really make them pay attention to this small little section where we just are showing these logos. That wraps up our logo ticker animations. Let's move on to the next section and animate the next section as well. Now that we've finished up with our logo ticker animation, let's go on to the next section and see what animation we want to add here. So what we're going to add is a parallax effect to our tube and our pyramid images that show on the right and the left of this product showcase image. And that's going to be in our product showcase section. In order to set this up, we know that we're going to need to go to the top and tell the React or Next.js that this needs to be a client component so that it loads it on the client side. And we also need to import motion from Framer Motion in order to start getting this set up. Now we know that we're going to need to replace our next/image with motion.img for both of these images. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to say motion.img. I'm going to change the sources respectively. So pyramid image.source, and same thing on this tube image. I'm going to say motion.img here and replace the tube image with tubeimage.src. That shouldn't change anything except for apparently the width of our tube image. So let me go ahead and set that width to 248 as well to ensure that it is set correctly. After that, we know that we're going to need to use the scroll position of the user in order to create that scroll parallax effect. So I'm going to import my use scroll hook. And once I've imported that, I can just go ahead and add it. I'm going to say use scroll. And we want to know what we'd like to be scrolling as the target. So what we're going to track as the scroll position of this. And this is, of course, going to be this product showcase section. So in order to set that target, I'm going to need a way to reference that DOM element. And we do that with the use ref hook. So I'm going to come up here and going to say const section ref is going to be equal to use ref. And I'm going to set that to a default of null just so TypeScript doesn't get angry with us. I'm going to comment this out just for a second so it doesn't mess up my rendering. And I'm going to go ahead and add the ref right here. So I'm saying ref equals section ref, and that should hook up this to be the DOM element ref included here. So once I do that, I can uncomment this use scroll again. I'm going to say my target is section ref. Now, my offset is going to be when I want this scroll effect to take effect. So I'm going to say offset, and that's going to be when the start of that section reaches the end of the window until the end of that section reaches the start of the window. So essentially from this position right here all the way down to this position right here is when this is going to take effect. Now, in order to track this, I also want to get the scroll Y progress from here. And very much like our other implementation, I want to transform that from 0 to 1 to some other different numbers. So I need to use my use transform hook, and I can say const translate Y, because we're moving this in the Y direction, is going to be equal to my use transform. I'm going to transform my scroll Y progress, and as it moves from 0 to 1, I'm going to set my transform from 150 to -150. So it's almost exactly like the implementation that we did for our parallax for the hero section, but now this is happening in this section instead. So I'm going to take my translate Y value and set this as a style on my motion images. So style equals translate Y, and I can just do it that way. That means translate Y equals translate Y. If they're both named the same thing in JavaScript and an object, you can do that syntax. And then down here, I'm going to say the same thing. So style equals translate Y, and that's going to set that as well. So once we save that, let's see what happens when we start to scroll. And indeed, I am seeing a great parallax effect happening with my pyramid as well as my tube. They're going over the product image as we scroll. Now we know that these don't show up in mobile, but we do know that they show up in desktop. So in order to take a look, I'm going to stretch my screen out and let's go ahead and look at the horizontal view again and see how this looks as we scroll on the different screens. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to scroll on tablet like we just saw. That is working well. Let's come over to our desktop view and make sure everything's looking good over there as well. And it is. It's looking beautiful. It's just adding that nice polished touch that shows that you added the extra time and effort into this page and that you really do care about what the user experience is like. With that, that wraps up this section of animations. This turned out really, really well, but it's time to move on to our next section in this page. Okay, we finished up with our product showcase animation. We're getting that great parallax effect, which means it's time to move on to what we want to do with the pricing section. Now, there's not a ton to do here, but we do want this little tag to animate the rainbow from right to left as well. And this is an interesting little animation. It just catches your eye, and that's exactly what we want for this particular section. So let's go into sections and let's go into pricing. I'm going to close that sidebar down so we just have a little bit more real estate for our code. And then we're going to look at how we can do that animation. Of course, like our other animations, we're going to import Framer Motion. So I'm going to import my motion component from Framer Motion, and we want to say use client so that this is a client side effect. After we save that, we can come down into our pricing tiers and see where our popular tag is located. It looks like it's located right here, which means that we need to adjust this span tag in order to make sure that the background is going to animate from right to left. Now, we can't animate the background without it being wider than the actual text itself. So we actually need the background size to be larger than the actual text, and then we can do that animation. What that means though is that we need to add an additional gradient, and then we need to change the background size to 200%. So let's see if we can just go ahead and add another set of these in here. So I'm going to copy and paste these colors right here. I'm going to add this right after my other ones, and so it's going to add an additional gradient on there. Now when we do that, we can also go ahead and change our background size to 200%, and I'm just going to say background size, and that's going to be my 200%. And let's see if that looks the same as it did before. It looks like it looks really similar, so I'm hoping that this will work the way that we expect it to, but let's see what happens when we change the span tag into a motion span. So I'm going to say motion.span because we can use any tag for our motion, any HTML tag we can change to a motion tag. So let's see motion.span here, so ending motion span. Let me save that, and that should still be aligned the way that we want. And then we need to go ahead and add our animation props. So our first one is going to be animate, and we're going to set that to background position X. We want the background position X to be animated negative 100%. So let me save this and see if we see that animation. And we of course want that to repeat, and we can control that with the transition props. Let me set the transition to repeat infinity. And we're also going to want the ease to be linear because we don't want to see a speed up or a slowdown of that. And we want the repeat type to be loop because we want that to start over at the beginning every single time. So as I save that, let me see if I can refresh my page and actually start to see that happen. So it is showing that for sure. And I don't think I'm seeing anything crazy there. I think the only thing I need to change is my duration. So let me go ahead and set my duration. Let me actually just set that to 1 and see if that's the correct value there. So as I refresh that, I do see that that's just slowly moving from right to left. And as I refresh that, I do see that it's slowly moving from left to right. So if we want to change that direction, we can just change this from negative to positive 100. Let's try to do that. And then it moves in the opposite direction. Now this animation is pretty small, so it might be a little bit hard to see, but it is an excellent animation. Let's see if we can change the zoom level to 200% and get a closer view at what that actually looks like. So let me change this to 200. And we do see as we zoom this or open this up and then we set this to 200%, we can really get an idea of what that looks like close up. It looks like a great, beautiful animation for this part of the page. It's just a little pop, just a little extra piece of polish to add to our pricing section. Now, as before, let's go ahead and go to our horizontal view so that we can make sure that everything looks good on all three views. So I'm going to go open this up even more. I'm going to make sure that my popular is showing up well there. It is. On tablet, it's showing up great. And on desktop, we're seeing this showing up well here as well. So that just adds another level of polish to our pricing section. That wraps up our animations for the pricing section. Let's go ahead and move on to our next section of the page. Now that we've wrapped up the animations for our popular pricing section, let's scroll down to our testimonials section. And this is going to be one of the most impressive effects on the page, because we're going to make these testimonials scroll from the bottom to the top, and it's going to look like we have infinite testimonials that are scrolling past. Essentially what we're going to recreate is this infinite scroll effect that we've already created with our logo ticker, but we're going to, instead of going from right to left, we're going to recreate this from top to bottom. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and open up our testimonials component page, and then we'll go ahead and dive in. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and tell this at the top of the page that we're going to use client. So I'm going to put in that use client here, and then below here I'm going to say import our motion from motion, or sorry, framer motion, and that should allow that to import correctly. And then we're going to see how we need to change around our testimonials so that these actually work well with our current setup. The first thing we know we need to do is we need to duplicate our testimonials. So we have one set of testimonials being shown here. We need to show these twice. I could copy and paste this entire block of code, but I don't think that would be the best way to do this because it's a lot of duplicated code. If we need to change something, we'd need to change it twice. What we can also do is just use a new array with 2 items, loop over that array, and then go ahead and loop over our testimonials every single time. So that's the strategy I'm going to use. I'm going to say ... new array. It's going to have 2 items. We're going to just fill that with a dummy value of 0, and then we're going to map over that. And for each item, we're not going to use the element itself. We're just going to use the index of the element, and we're going to show a React fragment. So I'm going to import React, just hitting enter there, .fragment, and that'll allow me to use a React fragment. And really the only reason I'm using the fragment here is just to have the key set correctly so that React is happy and it doesn't mess up whenever I drop these testimonials in here. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut this, paste it in here, and now instead of our 3 testimonials, now we have them duplicated into 6 for each column. So that's what we need in order to make them look infinite, because of course as we move the testimonials, these testimonials up, we need something to come in behind, and that's going to be the other testimonials that we're going to be looping over twice here. Now that we've done that, there's a couple more changes that we'd like to make. I think one of them is going to be that as we loop through these testimonials, we don't actually want the mask image to be on the column itself. Otherwise, the mask image will move with the testimonials. We actually want that on the parent container. So I'm going to cut this mask image from this testimonials column, and I'm going to pull it down into our wrapping flexed container here and just paste it there. It's not going to change my look, I don't think at all, but it will change how this works a little bit. I also want to take my margin from here and move it to my wrapping container as well, because we don't want that taking up any extra space as we're trying to make these testimonials show the way that we'd like them to. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up the spacing there a little bit, save that again, and that will mean that our margin and our mask container are moved a little bit. Doesn't change the look yet, So let's go ahead and see what else we need to do in order to make this work. Now, what I'll need to do is I want to be able to flex a wrapping div, but I don't want to change the size of this right here. So if we change the size of this div by directly flexing it with our parent container, we're going to end up with problems. So what I need to do is wrap this in another div, allow that div to be the one that takes on the flex from the parent container, and then that will allow us to move this div independently of this and resize it independently as well. So in order to do that, I'm also going to move up my props.className and pass this directly to this parent container instead. So I'm going to remove props.className here. Just by cutting it, I'm going to say class name is going to be equal to my props.className that I'm passing in. And now that I no longer need my Tailwind merge, I'm going to remove my Tailwind merge as well and just make this a static string. Let's see if that still shows up the way that we want it to. And it looks like overall it does. The only other thing that's going to mess us up, as far as I know, is that when we flex this container right here by saying in medium flex and large flex, we're going to wind up with problems there as well. So I'm going to change these instead of flex to block, and that's going to enable this to display block. Not going to show any difference here, but trust me, whenever we start to transition these, it's going to make a difference in the size of this container. So now that we don't have this container being flexed, this will allow this container to be the actual size of 2 times of our original column size, which is what we need. If this works correctly, what we'll see when we do a negative translate y 1/2 is we'll see this come up and be exactly at the top of our testimonials here. It's actually a little different, and that's because we need to add a little bit of padding to account for the gap as well. Okay, so this looks like we're working correctly right now. Now, instead of just making this a static negative translation, all we need to do is then animate that translated value. And of course, that's where our framer motion div comes in. So let me import my motion.div here, and let me change this over as well to a motion.div. Motion.div, save that. Nothing should have happened there except for it gives us the ability to use the animation prop. So let me pass this an animate prop. And in that animate prop, we're going to say that the translate y is going to go to negative 50%, like we said before. And it's obviously going to happen really quickly. That's not what we want. So we're going to use the transition prop to control that animation. In that transition prop, we're going to say that it repeats infinity times, that the ease is linear so that it all looks smooth when it starts and ends, and that the repeat type is going to be loop. So let's use that, let's save that, and let's refresh our page, and let's see what happens when we do this. Oh, that's way too fast. Let's slow that down with our duration, and let's make our duration something like 5 for now, just to see if this is a smooth animation, and I will refresh my page again. So let's see if we see any jumps, anything that would give us tell us that we didn't create this correctly. And it looks like we did. It looks like this is created exactly as we wanted it to. We need to slow this down a little bit slower. And so I'm going to make this duration 10. Now, in order to create the illusion that these are moving at different speeds, we would like to go ahead and dynamically set this duration at the parent container and pass it in as a prop. So all we need to do that is go ahead and tell this testimonials column component that it can also take a duration prop. It doesn't have to be there, and it's going to be a number. So we'll do that, and then we'll set this duration to my duration that I passed in, or if it's not there, we'll just go ahead and set that to 10. Excuse me, that's props.duration here. That's why that was showing that that wasn't there. So this is going to be a default of 10, but of course that's going to allow us to pass in a prop to set the duration dynamically. So when we come down to our wrapping div, we can give each of these a separate duration, and that's going to just make this look extra clean for this particular animation. So I'm going to set the first duration to 15. So that's going to slow that first column down. Let me refresh my page and see what that looks like. Okay, so now they're moving independently, and that's a really slick effect. Let me set my second column. Let me slow that down even more. I'm going to set this duration to 19. And when I refresh my page, we should see that. That's actually going to go slower than the first column now. And then for my third column, I'm going to set that in between and set the duration of that to 17. Now we can't see the third column yet, and of course that's because we're not seeing our desktop view. So let's actually just go ahead and switch over to our horizontal mode, and let's see all these three at once. I'm going to switch over to horizontal. It's going to start with mobile, so I'm going to scroll over there, scroll down, and we see that we do see those looking great on mobile. On the tablet view, we see 2 testimonial columns, so that looks great over there as well. And then once we get to the desktop view, this is really where this effect comes alive with all 3 testimonial columns scrolling over each other. Now, what I'm noticing is that the problem is we don't have a max height set here yet. So this is going to show things that we don't want this to show. So let's go back in and add our max height. Looks like we forgot that. And that will enable this to make sure that the overflow is properly hidden. So I'm going to say the max height is going to be 738 pixels. And then we're also going to say overflow hidden to ensure that we are indeed hiding any overflow that we have. So let me move this back out and make sure that that's taking effect accurately. And it looks like it is. I'm just going to give this a couple more seconds to scroll up, really take in this effect, because this is a really great effect that we've added here. And we've done this really easily with Framer Motion. Framer Motion gives us the tools that we need to do effects like this really, really easily. Now that we've taken care of our testimonials section, let's scroll down to the last section of the page that we're going to animate, and that's going to be this star and this spring image. We're going to add a parallax effect to that. Just so that we can see this a little better as we're creating our code, I'm going to leave this in tablet view for now, but after we're done, we'll look at the desktop view, ensure everything looks great there, and of course on mobile, we'll do the same there. So let's go ahead and open up our sections, and let's open up our call to action section. I'm going to close down the sidebar to give us a little bit more space for the code, and like before, we're going to make a couple of modifications to our section. We're going to add the use client directive, and below the imports, we're going to import our motion div from Framer Motion. Once we've imported that motion component, we can start to use that, and we'll replace our image, our next image, with motion.img. And like before, we'll need to add the actual source into the source property. Same thing here, motion.img will allow us to use Framer Motion properties, and we'll do the same thing with springimage.source to change that around. Now, nothing has changed so far about the way that this is laid out, but this does allow us to use a style prop and track the user's scroll position. So in order to do that, we'll bring in the use scroll hook from Framer Motion, and we'll use the progress of this section here in order to track the scroll progress. So I'm going to say that we need to add a const scroll y progress, and that's going to come from use scroll, and that use scroll is going to take in a target, which right now is just going to be null because I need to fill that in, and it's also going to have an offset, and that offset is going to be when the start of the call to action reaches the end of the window until the end of the call to action section reaches the start of the window, which probably might only happen on a small mobile screen, but that's fine. That will work out just fine. Now for our target, we need to add a reference to this section right here. So I'm going to add a ref again. I'm going to say const section ref, and that's going to be equal to use ref. And I'm going to hit enter and give that a default value of null. And then here we'll say section ref. Now we need to attach this to the section by saying ref equals section ref, and that will attach the target to the correct section there. Like before, we're going to want to transform that scroll y progress. So we know that that's going to be a value between 0 and 1 as we move through the scroll of that particular section. So we need to also use a use transform. So I'm going to import that, use transform, and I'm going to transform the 0 to 1 value to 150 and negative 150 by saying const translate y equals use transform, and that's going to transform scroll y progress from 0 to 1, 2, 150, and negative 150. So it's going to go from between these values to between these values. It just allows us to directly use this translate position. And then all we need to do is go ahead and set the styles of these motion images to use that transformed position that we just set. So we can say style equals, and then we can say translate Y to set the value of this to the key of translate Y. So translate Y equals translate Y is essentially what that's saying. And same thing here, style equals translate Y. That should allow that to be set correctly. Now, once we do that, let's go ahead and refresh our tablet view and see if we see anything different. So I see the images moved a little bit, but let's see as we scroll if we see those images moving more directly. And indeed we do. That's a nice effect, but I'm sure that it looks even better on desktop. So let's check that view out by going over to our desktop tab, sliding this out so we really get the full view here. And let's go ahead and just scroll past this. And that is just a beautiful effect. It looks really, really nice, very eye-catching for sure, and is going to direct the user's attention to that section as they scroll to that particular section. Now to finish this out, we just need to ensure that we haven't broken anything on any of our views. So let's go to the horizontal view. Let's scroll over to the mobile view to get started with. And of course, those don't show there. As we scroll down to tablet, we see these show up left and right. And of course, on desktop, it's most impressive because we see those images in full screen. So this looks really great. And that wraps up our animations for the entire page. We've done an amazing job. We've added a lot of eye-catching animations that show that we've really put time and effort into this page. I'm really, really happy with how this turned out.